Chapter 24. Showtime. Businesses catering specifically to those who can shift are popping up everywhere. A new social media site called First Base is gaining popularity, but it isn't alone. Plus, a dating app called Shifted allows you to filter by animal, so you can get dates with only those who are the same type as you. While the numbers of 2% seem to be holding strong, it is suspected there are a lot of people who are hiding from the animal within. In other news, research on what caused this worldwide phenomenon is in full swing, and preliminary results are expected in the next few days. TNN News Anchor. The alarm blared at McKenna, signaled the arrival of her day from hell. It provided a welcome distraction from her dreams. Dreams full of Hollywood movie creatures, scenes from alien worlds, and those strange symbols as patches on shoulders. Waking, even in a strange hotel room at 2:30 a.m., proved a relief from the emotions the images generated. Taking a few deep breaths to clear her mind, she levered herself out of bed and started to get ready. She'd laid everything out the night before, so she didn't need to dig for anything. 30 minutes later, showered, dressed in a pressed uniform, hair in a neat French braid, and the lightest touch of makeup, she grabbed what she'd brought in and headed down to checkout. It didn't make any sense to stay when she had no idea what the day would bring, and a hotel closer to the station would be more practical at that point. Walking out the door, she saw JD pulling up in his Hummer. His window slid down as he pulled up. "Perfect timing. You mind if we toss my bags in the back? I don't want to leave them here in case my car gets broken into."
"No problem."
He hopped out, the engine still idling, and tossed her bag in the back. With her car locked up tight, McKenna climbed into the front passenger seat. The fragrance of coffee filled her nose as she shut the door. "You're forgiven for all the bad things I've ever thought about you," McKenna stated as she grabbed a cup and took a long sip of his offering.
"Sure you say that now, until the next time I annoy you."
"Of course. You're only as good as your next cup of coffee." He pulled out and onto the freeway, empty at this hour of the morning. "I can't believe they want us there at 5 a.m.
"They want you there at this awful hour. I'm just refusing to let you go alone."
He sounded like he tried to be light and flippant, but worry coated the back of his tone. "Thanks." "Really?" She shifted from the topic, not wanting to dwell on another interview. "So, what did you think of Tony?" She saw his hands tighten on the steering wheel, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped 2 octaves.
"Kenna, if you're trying to set me up with Tony, I swear by my badge I will never speak to you again and ask for an immediate transfer."
There wasn't an ounce of humor in his voice.
"What? Wait, no!"
The words burst out as she spun in her seat so fast she almost dumped coffee on herself. "No, not at all that way. I would not do that to you. Ever. I just meant she seems really nice. And since both her kids change, she might like to come with us on another mountain trip. No, setting up never occurred to me at all. She's just, well, funny, smart, and sarcastic. Of course, I'd like you to like her." She almost babbled in her haste to convince him. "Really, I just don't have any female friends, and I wanted my best friend to like her." JD's hands relaxed, and his body let go of the tension.
"I'm your best friend?" "Okay."
He cleared his throat, not looking at her.
"No, I liked her. The conversation intrigued me, and I'm going to be watching a bit more closely at what's going on in the schools. I think it would be fun, and I suspect the kids would be a hoot to watch in the woods."
"Yeah, cool. Thanks." McKenna fell silent, frowning a bit, and shooting glances at her partner. "Did you really think I'd do that to you in such an underhanded way? I mean, I'd set you up if I found someone I thought you'd like and was worthy of you, but I'd be a hell of a lot more blunt about it." He blew out a breath, silence draping over the interior like the San Francisco fog.
"No, I guess not. I jumped to a conclusion when you asked me what I thought."
She snorted and focused on her coffee. "No biggie, but I won't ever do anything like that. Ever."
"Thanks."
The word held a wealth of pain, and she decided at that point to just be silent. Never a bad choice in her life. Instead, she focused on the images, the strange dream she had, and worried about what her superiors were going to do with her next. The temptation to blow the interview so badly they never asked her to do anything again still floated in the back of her mind. But Tony's words about her kids wouldn't stop echoing in her mind. Besides, she'd never be able to live with herself if she did less than her best. Companionable silence kept them company until they neared their destination with about 15 minutes to spare. Security waited for them and waved them through, then escorted them to the studio where they would be filming. A woman, a few years older than McKenna, walked over to them, a black headset stark against her dark blonde hair in a pixie cut. "I'm Helen Adams, director. You must be Officers Largo and Davidson. Thanks for being on time. We need to get you into makeup and then we can get you into the studio. The host will be there in about another 10 minutes. Is there anything I can get you? We have almost anything you would like." She kept up a steady stream of chatter as she ushered them into a room where 10 people waited, and a dizzying array of cosmetics and other beauty instruments lay waiting for them. "But I put on makeup," McKenna protested, even as she was ushered into a chair. "And I don't wear makeup," JD said, holding up his hands and trying to back up away from the approaching makeup artists. Helen replied with an amused tone. "You do now. If we don't, you look half dead on camera, and that completely ruins the effect we are going for of upstanding heroes." McKenna found herself in a chair, and her face and hair being redone, and the only way to get out of it seemed to be physical violence. So she subsided and suffered. In the mirror, she saw JD come to the same conclusion, and they both suffered. Powder, foundation, lipstick, her hair redone, all with a speed and artistry that made her just sit frozen. Helen appeared in the reflection behind her. "You look great. Come on, you two, time to be star of the show." McKenna kept her emotions off her face and stood and followed her, JD close behind. The smiling face of the host, Melinda White, greeted them on the huge TV screen as they walked into a little room. Her perfect smile scary at this scale. "Okay, you two, just wait here, and once we have the audience in and seated, you'll be ushered in by me. Take the seat we point at, and remember, this is supposed to be fun." Helen flashed them both a smile and rushed away as another young man came up. "Would you like some coffee, tea, something to eat?" She and JD glanced at each other, then in one voice, "Coffee and protein?" The young man tilted his head, then a smile flashed across his face. "Ha, yeah, you don't have to worry about the camera nonstop. Sorry, don't normally get real people here. Give me a few." He disappeared as fast as he showed up. "I'm really worried that eating food makes us real people." "I'm more worried about an entire group who regards real people as something unusual," JD responded, his eyes still looking out the door. He hadn't bothered to sit in any of the chairs. They weren't made for his bulk. Before they could say anything else, the young man hustled back in. He came back holding 2 cups of coffee in a largish bag. "Here you two go. You've got about 10 minutes before you'll be called. Please don't spill. I put sugars and creams in the bag. Enjoy." Before either of them could respond, he had disappeared through the door. McKenna set her coffee down and opened the bag, then grinned. There were 2 bagel sandwiches with sausage, egg, and cheese piled onto the bagels, along with little creams and sugars in the bottom of the bag. They both inhaled the food, sighing with relief as it hit. "We're going to have to prioritize food a bit more, I think," she muttered as she carefully finished the last few bites, trying to make sure she didn't destroy the work of the studio people. "I'm getting that feeling. Coffee until lunch isn't cutting it." He frowned, and she thought he had an idea, but before he said anything, Helen came striding in. "All right, let's get you on stage." A smile on her face, and McKenna felt the food curdle in her stomach and wished she hadn't eaten. Both taking one last gulp of coffee, they followed Helen out onto the soundstage, where the recognizable hosts were sitting, chatting, and the audience was all talking. People fell silent as they walked in, and Helen directed them to a chair. "Smile and relax," were her last words before she headed back off the stage, leaving McKenna trying not to panic at all the eyes looking at her. "And we are on in 5, 4. Someone off stage began to count, and she felt her pulse begin to race as her fingers sank into the armrest of the chair. "Don't worry, it'll be fine," Melinda White whispered, even as her co-host John Richmond winked at them. Then the hosts turned to the camera, with a bright red light on top of it, wide, bright smiles on their faces. The other cameras shifted and followed. 2 and action. The voice dropped to a whisper at that last bit, and the audience fell silent, watching her, it felt like. "Welcome to a special edition of Good Morning USA, Melinda said, in an overly perky voice that had McKenna cringing. We have special guests here this morning that I'm sure you'll recognize. Please join me in welcoming Officer McKenna Largo and Officer Joseph Davidson. McKenna felt J.D. flinch at the use of his name, and the bubble of amusement helped. As I'm sure everyone knows, Officer Largo featured in the video that first showed shifters to the world. Melinda turned those bright blue eyes and perfect cap of blonde hair to face them, the smile more predatory than what McKenna had seen in her own mirror. Welcome, Officer Largo, to our show. The raptor focus of the audience kicked every instinct she had into fight or flight, and the flight option ranked high in her personal preference. Instead, with a calm coolness she didn't really have, she smiled and responded. Please call me McKenna. Most of the time when people are calling me officer, either it's my boss or someone who's about to get a ticket. Melinda responded with another wide fake grin, and McKenna wondered why people bought it. Well, McKenna, I'm sure you've seen the video many times. What can you tell us about your thought process as you attacked those two men as a cat? The chirpy pleasantness almost masked the innuendos inherent in her statement. Actually, I've only seen it once. Seeing yourself stripped down naked on camera is only pleasant for actors, I believe. The audience let loose a soft gasp, but she kept her smile fixed on her face. As to my thought process, I focused on protecting the child by any means necessary. Given that my tools had been removed, I used what was available. Melinda's smile dimmed a bit, but she cranked it back up. So, have you found any difference in your sex life since you've become a cat? The salacious remark garnered sharp intakes of breath from the audience. This time, McKenna let her smile slip and growled. What is it with people and asking me about sex? I don't know. I don't want to know. At this time, I'm celibate, not that it's anyone's business. I've been focused on dealing with these changes to my life and trying to do my job well, not seeing what life as a real furry is like. She almost regretted it as soon as she said it, but the widening of the host's eyes and John Richmond's snort of laughter made it worth it. McKenna, John said, trying to keep his lips from twitching as Melinda tried to regain her footing. What are your thoughts about some of the segregation efforts in schools at this time? Don't. Her voice flat, still trying to fight down the annoyance of the stupid sex questions. J.D., choking silently next to her, didn't help at all. Could you elaborate? He prodded. I see you don't have children, but isn't there more to consider than don't segregate? I don't have kids, but I have a friend with 2 children that do shift, and they're the same kids they were before. Segregation is only going to lead to an us versus them environment and create a divide where there doesn't need to be one. At this time, I don't know of any issues that would justify that sort of change. Heck, while I know they think it's going to be identified as a virus, they haven't said if it's spreadable, and if it turns out it is, well, then we'll have something else to consider. But for now, she shrugged. They're kids. Don't worry about the fact that when they get naked, they tend to grow fur. The ripple of laughter through the audience didn't make her feel good, but she figured the laughter encouraged acceptance as opposed to something else, something darker. Do you think this has impacted your ability to do your job? John asked, as McKenna got the feeling Melinda was sulking. Impacted? No. Affected? Yes. John made a go-on indication with his hands, and she fought to figure out how to say this. I'm more recognizable, and that's letting people create snap judgments of me based on what they think they know. But it also has allowed me to create connections where there might not have been any before, so altered, but not impacted. Melinda smiled and leapt in with a question. You mentioned you were celibate. Does that mean there is no special man in your life? Not even the handsome J.D. sitting next to you? Her control failed, and a groan slipped out as J.D. choked a bit at the blatant lie that fell from Melinda's lips. Her mind raced as she tried to come up with an answer that wouldn't get her fired. And commercial.
She lifted her head to the sweetest words she had ever heard. Oh, thank the gods, now to set them straight on what I will and will not answer. Preparing herself for a fight, she turned, her mouth open, but a scream of rage and something else that she couldn't even assign a name to rang out through the studio. Her head jerked up to track to the sound even as she stood moving in the direction it had come from. Part of her noted JD up and moving too, but she didn't slow her head rotating until her eyes locked on a man rushing down the aisle, an object held high above his head. Even as he screamed, racing incredibly fast towards the stage, and the two TV personalities frozen in horror. McKenna's boots hit the floor as she moved to intercept, her mind calculating the angles before she even finished processing the thought, and she launched herself at the oncoming man. Her body tackled him in a textbook tackle. With barely a thought, she rolled with emotion, flipping up and over the man, pinning him beneath her as she wrenched the knife out of his hands and cuffed him all in one move. Wide eyes darted up to look at JD, who looked at her with the same expression she knew her face held. What the hell was that? That move is not policy. I should have told him to freeze, and there was no way in the world I should have been able to pull that off. They both set their faces into calm masks as McKenna started to read the man his rights, and all the people in the studio started to freak out. As she Mirandized him, JD moved over, and extracting a glove from one of his pouches, gingerly picked up the object the man had been holding. A long knife, a dagger more accurately, but not of metal, but of a black stone that glinted in the light. Is that seriously a knife made out of obsidian? McKenna asked as she stood up slowly. JD nodded as he turned it in his hand, then focused on the man gibbering at McKenna's feet. Looks like it. What is he saying? Is that Spanish? McKenna focused on the words but shook her head. No, I don't know what it is. Sounds weird, but not Spanish. They looked up to see security, local police, and the producer Helen all rushing at them, and McKenna sighed. At least I probably won't have to be on TV anymore. After 2 hours of questioning, and the proof that the cameras had still been filming and caught everything backing up their testimony, they were finally allowed to leave. Their phones already had messages from Kirk, Marchant, and Hollick. But at this point, her patience had frayed to the point that she refused to answer them until she had eaten lunch. A big lunch. Isn't there a Brazilian steakhouse around here somewhere? She asked, as they walked to the exit, escorted by security who looked at them sideways as they passed. Sure, sounds good. Nice, quiet, and maybe we can talk. JD shot her a look, and she gave a sharp nod, knowing he wanted to ask about that takedown, but neither of them said anything else. The door was held open for them as they walked into a crowd of people, more reporters and who knew who else. One of the security people spoke up. We'll walk you to your car. JD pointed where they parked, and they moved towards it, giving half smiles and nods at the people surrounding them. Let me take a guess. The footage got leaked? McKenna commented wryly, her voice low. Yes, ma'am, one guard said, his face blank. Great. She turned her head to scan the crowd, a bad feeling creeping up her spine. McKenna, look out! JD's shout had her turning too late, and 2 needle pricks hit her neck. Then lightning coursed through her body. She opened her mouth to scream, but the cat took over, sweeping upwards and out of her, the pinpricks popping away as she faced the crowd, the cat in full control. Kenna! The voice sounded familiar, safe, and she lunged towards the voice, the friend, only to trip on things binding her legs, her arms, and another shout. Then pain blossomed in her side, and it all went dark. Chapter 25. Avoiding Tests. Violence against shifters, or those who have publicly admitted to being able to shift, is on the rise. A few riots in some areas of the world where people were killed. At least 3 reported instances of people who shifted being killed by their neighbors. In Egypt, safe zones have been created by the government for shifters. An interesting side note from Africa, there are multiple reports of people who shifted becoming the leaders of their people, and in some cases being worshipped as gods, which might not be as far from the truth as we would like to believe if more information about the healing abilities is proven. TNN World News. Pain rippled through McKenna, and she tried to move away from it,
but it followed her like a bad dream. Everything felt weird, heavy, and she tried to lift her head. The pain spiked higher, making her cry out.
Kenna, can you hear me? Kenna, listen to me.
JD, I'm not alone. What happened? The relief cooled the pain, and she stopped struggling as much. If JD talked to her, it meant everything would be okay. A heavy weight landed on her arm, but it didn't feel right. That wasn't where her arm lay, was it? I need to see. Why can't I see? The thought forced her mind to clear, and she figured out how to get her eyes open. She saw a sea of feet and legs, all well away from her and slightly out of focus. McKenna blinked, trying to get her eyes to clear, and it didn't work. Everything stayed out of focus. Oh, I'm a cat. Why am I a cat? I haven't changed in days. Did I mean to change? Why do I hurt? I never hurt before or after I changed. The thoughts tumbled over each other as she tried to remember what happened after they walked out of the studio, but she couldn't pull the pieces together.
Kenna, listen to me. You shifted into a cat. I need you to shift back. Can you do that? Can you become human? We need to treat you for the gunshot.
His voice remained calm, but the sense of fear and worry surrounded her nose. I got shot? What the hell? JD's homely mug appeared in her vision, his cheek laying almost on the ground.
There you are,
he smiled, and she recognized relief on his face.
Kenna, I need you to go human. The paramedics can't help you as a cat. I need you to shift back. Can you do that?
She blinked at him, then closed her eyes, trying to focus. The cat fought, wanting to lash out, to protect, but she pushed it back, soothing it mentally, and thought of her body, her shape, the way it felt, and felt her bones and muscles move back into their familiar alignment.
Oh, thank you.
JD's fervent whisper rocked her, and she opened her eyes again to see him standing.
She's back. Get her lifted up and in that bus.
His voice cracked like a whip, and McKenna turned her head trying to see, to track what had happened. How the hell did I get shot? McKenna tried to speak, but she felt herself being turned and looked up into two worried faces in uniforms. The sound of worried voices surrounded her. Sudden exhaustion swept through her, and she just wanted to close her eyes and go back to the darkness.
Kenna, don't you dare pass out. Listen to me.
JD loomed in front of her again, ignoring protests from the EMTs.
You need to focus. The bullet went into your chest as a cat, and I have no idea where it means the bullet landed in your human body. Looks like you get to be partially naked in public again.
Hands were pulling open her clothes, and a spike of pain went through her again. But she swallowed the cry, focusing on JD. The pain cut through the fog in her brain, and she ignored the fingers probing into her chest.
What happened?
Even in a whisper, it came out harsh, demanding.
Some lunatic in the crowd hit you with a taser and you shifted. In the ensuing panic,
his voice got bitter and harsher than she'd ever heard him.
One of the idiotic security guards drew his gun and shot you.
She heard a muffled whine and tilted her head in that direction. One of the guards lay on the ground, no one touching him, blood running from his nose as he held his jaw.
I might have decked him.
JD's voice definitely resembled a growl, and she choked back laughter, and even that little movement made her body ripple in pain. Hold still, damn it, one of the EMTs cursed, and she looked at them. Get her belt off, give her weapon to her partner. They were fighting with her uniform. Because of the interview, while they had worn weapons, they hadn't put on their bulletproof vests. Damn it, she cussed as pain spiked as her belt slid off and they ripped the shirt open, exposing, she knew, her beige bra to the people who were certain to be filming this. Well, maybe people will send me money to buy La Perla, she muttered as she tried not to move as they poked at the wound. It still hurt, but compared to the pain it had been, it seemed less. An EMT snorted. Dream on, that shit is expensive. McKenna laughed as she fought against the urge to pull away from the pain. The need to look around and find the perp that tased her kept making her jerk her head. Who tased me? Why? She asked, more to distract herself than anything else.
Don't know. Male, I think. He got away in the chaos after you shifted.
JD stood near her, and she saw him constantly moving his head, looking,
bristling aggression.
Damn it. How the hell is this possible? An EMT muttered, and her head jerked up.
What?
Her voice sharp. You've started to heal, but the bullet is lodged deep inside because the wound started to close around the channel. You're still bleeding, but now they'll have to cut it open to get it out.
The EMT looked at her, half scared, half serious. Remember that in the future? If you shift, you heal, and it will lock it inside. And trust me, you don't want a bullet to stay in you. They're usually filthy, especially if they drug fabric into the wound with them. He turned and nodded to JD. We need to get her to the hospital. They're going to have to cut it out, and I have no idea where it lodged. She won't bleed to death, but it could be someplace dangerous where if the bullet moves, she dies. He turned a serious gaze on her. Largo, listen to me. I know it hurts, but the bleeding has stopped. The wound looks like it happened about 5 hours ago, but I can't tell if you are bleeding internally or the path of the bullet. Your shifting twisted it. We need an x-ray, and you need to get it out. So quit fussing. Let your partner do his job. The words were said even as they hoisted her on a gurney and fastened her in. Fine. JD, call the station and... She paused for a moment, then shrugged. Call Tony, let her know. Jostling caused her to close her eyes in pain. Pain that felt different. I think I might be about to pass out. The world went black, and no matter what the voice said, she sank into the abyss. Chapter 26. Hospitals. Information has filtered out about an important aspect to shifting. There are a few people with damaged spines that were affected by the ability to shift. Their spines repaired, and when they moved back into a human form, the damage was gone. Further research conducted by medical doctors being presented in an article for a medical journal implies that flesh wounds will heal completely. However, if the bone is broken and not aligned correctly when the shifting happened, it will heal incorrectly, requiring the bone to be broken again to heal correctly. It seems, at least for a few people, the ability to shift is definitely a blessing. The news cuts away to follow a man who is walking again after being paralyzed for the last year from the neck down after an accident. TNN News. Flickering images, bright lights, people with masks leaning over her, JD's voice, an overly sweet taste that took away her cares. Then she found herself awake in a hospital room, with Hollick talking quietly to JD. They both turned as she croaked out, What happened? JD moved over to her, putting ice in her mouth, which helped a lot. She closed her eyes, trying to marshal her energy, but hunger clawed at her insides. Hey, don't talk. His voice remained low, and for a minute, she just listened, unable to even form thoughts. They had to operate because of where the bullet was in relation to your heart. They had to come in from the side and remove it. It had nicked your liver and was in danger of moving to impact your heart. They got it out and sealed it up. You should be fine. The doc said they think if you shifted, it would heal faster, but they want to give you a day or so to make sure nothing else happens. She nodded, trying to figure out how to explain the starvation clawing at her insides. Okay, slipped from her mouth and she licked her lips, trying to focus. Kenna, what's wrong? JD leaned close, and Hollick filled her field of vision as she tried to articulate the clawing need that shredded her mind and body. Starving. The word came out cracked and broken. Anne furrowed her brow, but JD paled. Oh, shit. He looked at her IV, gray skin, and he paled. This isn't good. Give me a minute. He started to turn, but Anne stopped him. Oh, what's wrong? You always wake up after surgery hungry. They'll let her have some Jell-O and stuff soon. She got tased. She shifted, got shot, then shifted back, and burned thousands of calories. She needs massive amounts of calories, like now. Let me get a nurse and a doctor in here. He left before Anne could stop him. She turned to look at McKenna, frowning. I saw you eat before. Is it that serious? Hunger and the cat clawed at her brain, the cat desperate to eat and to lick her wound. The odd feelings caused a wave of dizziness, and she fought to swallow past the desert in her throat. Don't know. usually eat immediately after. How long since shot?
The words were scratchy and raw, and Anne offered her some more ice, which she took, gratefully. Between surgery and your recovery, it's been about 14 hours. It's almost 11. She tried to get her mind to click. That meant all she had was that bagel in the last 13 or so hours. She tried to sit up, but the movement caused a fresh wave of pain, and Anne lunged forward. Don't do that. They had to cut you open to get to the bullet. You need to lay there and rest. McKenna wanted to protest, needing to move, to shift, to eat. Everything beat at her, making it harder to think. Voices in the hallway pulled her attention away from her own issues, and JD stormed in, followed by a nurse and a doctor.
I don't care what you're babbling. She can't eat for another few hours until we've made sure everything is sealed. A human can go for a while without eating. It won't kill her. You are not listening to me. She shifted. That burns thousands of calories. She needs the food before her body starts to cannibalize itself.
The doctor, an older man with silvery hair and glasses, peered over his glasses at JD.
That is all supposition. None of this has been studied. She'll be fine.
McKenna raised her arm, meaning to get their attention, and moaned as a fresh wave of pain hit her again. Damn it, now you've agitated her. The nurse snapped and reached forward, pushing a button on the machine connected to her IV. There, I dumped in some more morphine that will put her to sleep and lower the pain. I'll see if she can have some Jell-O in a few hours.
Oh, no, JD muttered,
and McKenna looked up at him as she felt the burning in her veins from the drugs. She'd had morphine before, and remembered a pleasant heaviness like a weighted vest over her. But this time it attacked. Sleep and numbness, spreading through her, and the cat fought back. She arched in the bed as she fought the drugs, screaming as the wound tore open. It was too much, and the cat surged forward, snarling, attacking the tube feeding the drugs into her body.
Kenna!
The shout pulled at her, and she looked for the friend, and JD loomed in front of her as she thrashed in the bed, pain pulling at her as she moved. A high whine escaped, and she turned to look at the wound in her side, bleeding sluggishly. Driven by instincts and needs she couldn't understand, she looked at it, tasting the bad drugs in the wound, antiseptics, and other tastes that were wrong in her blood. Screams and shouts made her look up and snarl, knowledge fighting with the need to run, hide, and heal.
Everyone out!
JD's bellow made her curl up, ears back, snarling at the chaos, unable to find an escape.
Get those damn idiots out of here now, Hollick. Then go down to the cafeteria and get all the meat you can carry. Cheese, anything protein or fat-based. Hell, I don't care if it's raw at this point as long as it's not frozen. Go!
He bodily shoved everyone out of the room, his bulk allowing no argument. McKenna twitched an ear as a part of her laughed. JD never cussed. Ever. If he's cussing, am I dying? Shutting the door, he jammed the door wedge under it with a vicious kick, then taking a deep breath, turned and looked at her. McKenna snarled, but it wasn't anger. It was a mix of pain, fear, needs she couldn't understand, and her ability to push it down and act calm had vanished.
I'm so sorry, Kenna. I should have made them listen. Give me a minute, okay?
She hunched her shoulders and redirected her attention to the wound, licking it, hating the tastes that coated her tongue. Part of her winced in disgust, but it soothed her, even as she tracked his movements with twitches of her ears and darted looks. Going over to the closet in the room, he pulled out 2 blankets and made a nest out of them, then added pillows along the side. She paused in her licking. Her 2 essences agreed that his actions were interesting. He stood, moving over to her.
Kenna, will you let me pick you up, carry you over there?
He stood waiting, and she glanced at the distance. Her instincts told her she could leap that without effort. Her wound and pain made her reluctant to. She pulled away from the wound and nodded. His large arms slipped under her, lifting her body with ease. I'm never going to be able to tease him about weightlifting again. The thought made her whiskers twitch, but then she had to focus on not reacting, as even his gentle action caused pain to lance through her. but in a moment he had settled her down on the floor. She pawed at the blankets, turned once, and curled up in them. The movements slow, but it felt good to be nearer the ground. And then he slid down to the floor next to her. His heavy hand lay gently on her shoulder as he sat next to her, unconcerned about the claws and teeth. That attitude made her feel even safer, and she relaxed, trying to put together why the cat reacted differently from herself.
I'm sorry, Kenna. I should have stopped them. Though I'll admit to you, this worries me. I know you're in there, but it seems when you change without your conscious choice, the animal is in control, reacting. That isn't good, but I think we'll be fine.
Absently, his hand ran down her back and over her ribs.
Ah! He yanked his hand back inside. Sorry, I know you aren't a cat. It's just instinct to pet fur, I guess.
She just hunched a little tighter, not wanting to admit how good it had felt. But the panic subsided, and she tried to figure out what happened. Something in her fought the drugs and forced her to change. She had not even considered changing, but the cat took over in a wild panic over the drugs flooding her system. Why? Surely they had given her the drugs before. Why now did the cat fight?
All I have is more questions. Hell, one of the questions is, do I still have a job at this point?
Before she could spiral too hard into that mess of stress, a thudding sound came from the door. JD got up and walked over.
Yes?
I've got the food. The words had her head jerking up, and then a whine slipped out as the movement pulled at the wound. JD pulled out the wedge and opened the door to reveal Anne holding a large stock pot with a bag hanging from her wrist. They were making pot roast. I cleaned them out of everything meat-based, even if they protested about the well-doneness of it. And I've got cheese and some bread here. I noticed earlier your human forms didn't mind, and I've seen my cats eat weird stuff.
I doubt she'll care right now. The meat and cheese are full of calories, and I think that's what she needs.
He hesitated, then admitted.
I hope I'm right. I'm just guessing here.
McKenna had already pushed to her feet, mouth watering, as the scents pulled saliva from her, as her claws extended, digging into the blankets. I don't think she cares. Here. Anne handed him the stock pot, and he turned to see McKenna standing there, eyes on the pot.
Me either, he muttered as he sat in front of her.
All thoughts fled as she stuck her head in the pot and grabbed a mouthful of meat. The flavors exploded, and she tore a piece off, swallowed, and tore another piece off. The next 10 minutes were spent stuffing food into her system as fast as she could tear and swallow, fighting with herself to make sure the chunks she tore off were small enough to swallow. The pot was empty, and she slumped a bit, but the gnawing hunger had left. She stepped back into her nest, turning once, then curling to look at the wound. But it had healed more and was only an open raw spot.
Here.
JD's voice caused her to pull out of the now existence the cat created. He held out a chunk of cheese. With careful deliberation, she took it from his hand, chewing it, letting the rich fat coat her tongue. Apparently, she needed that because she ate everything he gave her until it was gone. Then she tucked her head under her paw, trusting him to guard her. Exhaustion pulled her down into a dreamless sleep. Voices woke her, and she lifted her head to see JD talking to 3 people at the door. McKenna rose and stretched. It ached, but the pain of yesterday was gone.
No, you aren't going to poke at her. Honestly, I'm still considering telling the police union to press charges. You know I'm her medical care advocate, and you didn't listen.
His voice remained calm and even, but she recognized that unbending stance. With both of them being single, and either no parents or estranged from them, they had made each other their legal medical advocates. In all the hours together, they both knew what the other would want in any circumstance. Moving with inherent cat-like silence, she bumped his leg and he glanced down.
Feeling better?
McKenna nodded, yawning. It felt good, and had the added advantage of the people JD had been arguing with backing away nervously. A self-satisfied feeling ran through her. I got it, but you owe me. My credit card is starting to hurt. Anne's voice came through as she pushed through the people. She had 2 bags in her hands, and the mouth-watering smell of bacon surrounded her.
Now go away. I'm going to see to my partner, as you obviously can't."
He shut the door in protesting faces and leaned against it, his bulk as good a barricade as anything else in the room.
"I think you need to change back. Anne brought a ton of food. I looked at the wound while you slept, and it looks like days, if not weeks, have passed instead of less than 24 hours. And I'd really like to actually be able to talk to you again."
The urge to stay a cat whispered through her. But this not talking did suck, and she felt like she needed to be her again. There was the vague feeling of something else guiding her as a cat, and honestly, it freaked her out. She nodded and walked over behind the bed where the discarded gown she had wriggled out of earlier still lay. A deep breath, and she called herself back. This time, she had to fight for it. With effort, she pulled her sense of her human body into her mind and held it there. After a moment that lasted an eternity, she flowed back into herself, the cat grumbling, but subsiding. A surge of heat along her side accompanied the change, something she'd only noted the first time. Wobbling a bit, she grabbed the gown, pulling it up. "At this rate, I really need to get over any body modesty. I seem to spend half my time naked in front of people. And JD, we don't have that type of relationship." Her grouse had both JD and Anne smiling.
"How you feeling, Kenna?"
he asked, moving forward. "Hungry, but..." She paused and pulled back the gown, exposing where she had been cut. A red raised area where the bullet had gone in lay on her skin. Above it, a red slash where they had cut her open. She poked it, and it was tender, but it looked like it had healed for weeks, not hours. "How long was I asleep as a cat?"
"Only about 6 hours. It's just 5 a.m.,
JD said, his eyes locked on the wound as she looked at him.
"Bonus superpowers?"
McKenna bit her lip and shrugged.
"I don't know, but I'm not sure if this makes it better or worse."
"Both," Anne said dryly. "But on the bright side, I guess you don't need to take medical leave." She handed McKenna the bags of food. "Eat up. Let's get the doctors in here, and then you have a test to take, and superiors who want to talk to you." The words killed her appetite.
"Joy. I think being shot was better."
The other two snorted in agreement, and McKenna started to inhale the food. Chapter 27. Moving on up. Want to lose weight like a shifter? Our new drug, while not letting you change into an animal, will make your friends and enemies think you can. Try Meltdown, the new weight loss drug that helps your body melt fat off. It's the next best thing to being a shifter, and you won't have shedding to deal with. Radio ad for Lupitrail. After much protesting, taking 2 x-rays, and 3 vials of her blood, the hospital let her leave 8 hours later. McKenna wasn't sure if the glares were from all the problems they caused or her body not doing what they expected. JD led the way to his Hummer as Hollick told them she'd meet them back at the station, and she had emphasized that detours were not allowed. "Want me to drive? Have you slept at all?" McKenna asked, looking at JD. The last 24 hours he'd been dealing with her shit, and she'd barely said thank you.
"You feel up to it?"
he asked, turning to look at her, and she noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Yes, actually. Whatever the shifting did when mixed with the food, I feel pretty good."
"And your side doesn't hurt?"
"Not really. A bit tender, like it's bruised or something, but that's it. Give me the keys. You look exhausted." McKenna held out her hand and was both relieved and worried when he dropped the keys in her hand. JD hated to let other people drive. It underscored how exhausted he must be. Guilt ate at her, but she couldn't lay the blame at her feet for this one. Climbing in, she took a minute to adjust the seat so she could see correctly. Once buckled in, she glanced and saw he already had his eyes closed and chair tilted back. With a soft smile, she backed out and headed to the station. The sun peeked through the clouds, revealing what would be a typical sunny, warm California day. She tried to pull in the joy of having a day of beautiful weather and a job she loved, but it wouldn't come. The fear, questions, and confusion from the last few days clambered at her brain and made it impossible to talk. Blowing out an annoyed sigh, she hit the radio, wanting to see what she had missed in the last day. Harvey Klein's voice, a local talk show host, filled the car with his deep, mellow sound.
A few days ago, the death of 2 college students raised some questions as the condition of their bodies didn't match what was known. However, the state just released the autopsy report and their findings. The official cause of death is starvation. The supposition by the medical examiners that a mixture of cocaine and LSD being used while they shifted back and forth caused their body to eat itself alive. So here is proof to the vague rumors filtering around the net. Yes, shifting burns calories and you can die if you don't eat. So, moms, if your teenager tells you that they're starving, maybe you shouldn't ask if they're doing drugs, but if they are shifting. The new questions for parents in this decade.
McKenna hit the power button and glanced over at JD. He snored lightly, oblivious to the world.
You probably saved my life. I owe you.
Her words were soft, but came from her soul. The miles were eaten up by the big car, making her feel isolated from the world. Time to face the internal issues.
How the hell did I tackle that guy so perfectly, calculating exactly what to do? Why did the shift focus on healing the wound? How did my body know how to spend energy there? And what are these symbols? And why only 2% of people? Why not more? Why almost all predators?
The questions twisted and turned, but she didn't have any answers. And one more question appeared.
Why the people who changed? Why did we succumb to the virus? We are all healthy, active, intelligent. Or is that the wrong question? Why did we get infected?
That question rocked her back on her mental heels, and she twisted the idea even more as she drove, hyper alert to anyone following them. After the last few days, she didn't take anything for granted, but she saw nothing. And the Hummer prevented most other drivers from being aggressive to her, which was a good thing. Her temper rode a short leash right now, and it would burn away in an instant. Nothing resolved for her on the drive, and as she pulled into the station, she just wondered how she would make this all work. So many things there were no policies or protocols for. The legal department must be having conniption fits every time they saw her name. "Hey, we're here," she said in a normal voice as she shut off the car. JD's eyes flicked open, and he held still as he looked at everything, then relaxed and sat up in the chair.
"I see you didn't wreck my Hummer."
"Oh, please. Like people would let me hit them in this thing? They ran if I got too near." He flashed a grin at her.
"Exactly. Protection by intimidation. Works most of the time."
McKenna laughed as she climbed out and headed to the station. Dressed in jeans and a t-shirt that JD had grabbed from her clothes, she felt underdressed and out of place. The fact that the jeans were loose on her hips didn't help at all, though a small part of her, the part that thought she was fat, clapped in glee. Annoyed, and realizing her day had just begun, they walked into the station and once again were met with silence. But just as she had stiffened her back to deal with it, someone started clapping. Then another. And soon, the entire station clapped, everyone looking at her with, if not a smile, at least not a glare. She stood there frozen, unsure until the desk sergeant growled at her, his version of a friendly voice. "You did good. Took down the idiot, didn't kill the idiot who tased you, and got shot through no fault of your own. And yet here you are, hale and hearty and ready to go back to work. That's what I call a dedicated officer. Now get your ass down to the conference room and take the damn test." The station chuckled as the clapping died away, and she nodded her head in a half-thanks, half-embarrassed gesture as she headed to the conference room with JD laughing softly behind her. The sounds at her back made her feel welcome and at home. Something she hadn't felt here since the change. Sure, there were probably a few people that still had issues with it, but knowing her coworkers as a whole supported her healed something deep inside and helped to steel her spine. Hollick looked up as they walked in. "You don't look like you just got shot yesterday. Was starting to wonder if I'd imagined the whole damn thing. But the pile of paperwork on my desk proves I didn't." She gestured to the man sitting in the corner. "This is the union rep. He'll proctor the test since you missed it yesterday. Both of you sit. And I swear if you don't pass it, with flying colors I might add, I'm going to skin you both alive in your animal forms and use you as rugs." Her glare held amusement and seriousness, and McKenna swallowed and nodded, sinking down into the chair as JD took the other one across from her. The proctor rattled off how much time they had, the rules, and then told them to begin. McKenna opened the test and started answering questions. Time disappeared in the scratch of pencil on paper and question after question. The last essay question loomed up at her, and she looked at it, reading it multiple times. If you had to choose between being shot and allowing a child to be hurt, which would you choose? Explain your rationale and how you would handle the situation. The question made no sense. There was no choice. Again, she reread it, looking for the catch, and couldn't find it. With a shrug, she started to write, wondering how anyone could ever answer for the child being hurt. The last question done, she set down her pencil and looked up. 3 hours had passed, and exhaustion from the traumatic day snuck up on her, and she closed her eyes as she waited for JD to finish. The scritching sound from JD's work acted as a lullaby as she waited, and she found herself dozing lightly, aware of what was going on but not paying active attention. Everything kept moving fast, but if she slowed down, she knew she'd go careening out of control. She had to follow up on buying the house and see if the movers moved all her stuff as she'd been out of touch, talk to Tony and let her know what happened, and find out why someone tased her. The shooting part at least she could comprehend, not to mention the crazy guy with an obsidian knife. Who the heck used obsidian knives? The click of a pencil being laid down pulled her out of her musing, and she came back to the real world to see JD looking at her, then turning his head to look at the proctor.
We good?
Yes, Officer Largo finished a little bit ago. The man stood, collected their papers, checked them over quickly, then nodded. Thank you, I'll turn them in. With a sigh of relief, she stood, stretched, and headed back out. Anne Hollick stood in the hall waiting for them. Good, Kirk is waiting for you. She bit back a moan. This so wasn't what she wanted to deal with. At this point, she really hadn't processed what happened. It seemed like days ago, but she knew it had barely been 24 hours. Her feet felt like they had Velcro on the bottom as they walked toward Kirk's office, JD behind her. She could tell from his pace he wasn't any more excited than she was. Heading to what she knew would be their doom, McKenna just tried to figure out what she could be in trouble for, but drew a blank. Giving in to the inevitable, she knocked on Kirk's office door.
Come in,
his voice clear and calm, and at this point, she'd take any advantage she could get. She pushed open the door, stepping in a bit.
You wanted to see us, Captain?
While she thought he was an ass, his comments the other day had raised her opinion of him, at least a bit. Who knew? He could always lower it again.
Largo, Davidson, come on in. Take a seat,
Kirk said with a wry smile on his face, and waved at the 2 chairs. His office presented the opposite picture of Hollick's tiny office. Large, spacious, but even McKenna couldn't say he didn't work. The desk had piles of paper. His computer screen showed an email inbox that looked worse than hers at home. His hair had been ruffled more than usual, and he had shadows under his eyes that rivaled Hollick's. Her stomach clenched as she wondered how much of that pointed back to her. She started to sit, but Kirk stopped her.
Not to be inappropriate, but would you mind showing me where you were shot?
His voice stayed flat, and she couldn't read anything into it.
No.
She lifted the side of the shirt, exposing her side, and the red marks where the bullet and subsequent surgery had broken the skin.
I heard. I didn't know if I believed. He shook his head. Sorry, please sit.
McKenna sank into the chair, and JD took the one next to him.
You seem to attract strange situations, like ants to a picnic, he said, his voice wry as he looked at them. But so far, everything we've looked at you've handled with professionalism and grace that I don't think I could have pulled off. But be that as it may, you are one of the most recognizable people in the world at this moment.
She flinched, closing her eyes. Fame had never been a goal of hers, and having it didn't make her feel anything but revulsion.
I'm sorry, Captain.
And to her own bemusement, she actually was sorry. The headache she must be causing them had to be incredible.
Do you need me to resign?
Gods, no! The words burst out of Kirk before the echo of her own words had faded. The words made her jerk back a bit, and JD stiffened at the same time. Look, let me explain. He stood and walked over to shut the door, then sat back down, his eyes serious. And for the first time, McKenna wondered if maybe she'd underestimated this man. He sighed and ran his fingers through his hair again. I know, most of the station thinks I'm a self-aggrandizing jerk who only cares about promotion. And that calling me Captain Kirk pisses me off. I am interested in promotion, and I think it's hilarious that people call me Captain Kirk, but it's a safer thing to be prickly about and let people poke at it. Safe for everyone. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and opened them, looking at McKenna. My great-grandmother lived in France during the Holocaust. She helped people flee the Reich because she knew no one should be punished for what they are. Her sister was a lesbian, which at that time was unheard of. Her sister was killed, shot by German soldiers when she refused to come with them to wear the triangle. My great-grandmother came here and raised a family. I loved that woman, and she made damn sure that I knew that all it takes for evil to succeed is good men to do nothing. I doubt I'm a good man, but I'll be damned if I let this, he waved his hands in the air, curse, blessing, gift, mutation, whatever it is, provide people a reason to isolate or punish others. If people like me, people in power, don't stand up and say no, then people like you will become the next Jews in the Holocaust. And I'll go to hell before I let that happen. His intense tone, direct eyes, and absolute conviction rocked McKenna back. All of a sudden, she wondered if she had been too harsh on the man. All that being said, you've done nothing but behave in a manner I wish all my officers would. He took a deep breath. But you have managed to cause more paperwork in the last week than most officers have in the last decade. McKenna winced a bit, all too aware of the accuracy of that statement. However, you are so public, I have to make use of you to make sure people don't think your abilities have any bearing on your job. Conversely, you've had so much stuff happen to you that we don't even have policies on, that at this point, I can't have you back on regular duty. She winced a bit, but nodded slowly. Heck, technically, you should be on medical leave for the next 6 to 8 weeks, but I'm going to use you. He nodded at JD. And Davidson, too. If he had said those words to her a week ago, she probably would have already been protesting. But the last week, not to mention her fear she really was going insane, tempered that reaction. How is that, Captain? There are some ground roots issues with children who are shifting. Parent groups are throwing fits as there have been a few cases of biting or scratching from kids. We want to make it very clear that children who shift are to be afforded the same rights as all other children. We would like you two to be part of our ambassador team, a bus that picks up shifter kids in different districts and spends a day with them, showing them some cool parts of being a shifter, reassuring parents that shifters can hold responsible jobs and can be normal people. His eyes crinkled at that, or at least act like normal people. Right now, you, out of all the people in the world, are the most visible shifter there is, and everything you've done has gone viral. What? She knew about the original video, but what was everything? You didn't know? The Lion video was compiled into an almost seamless visual and went viral, and someone caught the guy tasing you, your shift getting shot, and Davidson here decking the idiot who shot you. Though, right now, with the image of him curled up next to your cat form and calling your name, I expect lots of theories about you as star-crossed lovers. McKenna cast a horrified look at JD, who had a matching expression on his face, and Kirk burst out in laughter. Well, I think that answers that unspoken question. But yes, all of that went live. Everyone knows who you are if they know what the internet is, he shrugged. I'm sure you've already had some of the fallout get to you from what I've heard. Something about an impromptu press conference? Yes, sir, she shrugged. No worries. But starting tomorrow, you are on a public relations assignment until the department can get some policies written. Hernandez and Mansour haven't had any waves, and at this point, I don't believe the public knows they can shift. And if possible, I'd like to keep it that way. Tomorrow will be some basic training, and we'll find out if you're both doing this as sergeants or not. His steel-eyed gaze made it clear he expected the promotions to come through. Then you get to hang with kids. He paused, a worried look on his face.
You two can work with kids, right? JD coughed and McKenna smiled. Yes, Captain, we're fine with kids. Good. Then get out of here unless you've got anything else for me.
No, Captain, I think we're good. McKenna rose. Time to report tomorrow?
8 a.m. should be fine, thank you. Both of you. Officers like you are one of the reasons I don't mind the Star Trek jokes.
McKenna felt her face flush as he grinned and shooed them out of his office. They walked out, nodding at people, then stopped at his Hummer. Damn it. Kirk keeps that up and I might actually like and respect him.
JD burst out in laughter, then nodded. Agreed. Maybe the world is ending. Where to?
Crash at your place? I don't care anymore and I'm exhausted and even your couch is looking good.
Oh, I should have an empty spare room and a bed you can use if you'd like.
McKenna shot him a look. He shrugged.
I made phone calls, got crap done while you were busy being lazy and sleeping.
McKenna flashed him a smile. Thanks. Yeah, I just want food and sleep, and a bed sounds great. JD climbed up, and she followed him. What in the world is going to happen next? Chapter 28. Aha Moments. With the rise of people of all backgrounds with this new ability, more people are starting to claim that shifters have unfair advantages. Besides the obvious loss of weight and becoming healthier almost no matter what they eat, some tests have implied they might be faster or stronger than regular humans. If this is the case, how can we share this gift with everyone? Why should one small segment of the population be gifted with something the rest of us can't have? The question isn't should they be protected from discrimination, but should we be preventing unfair advantages of these shifters when competing for jobs or positions? TNN Talking Head. SeaTac leaned back and grinned at his notebook. One thing you could say for the boss, making people present documented plans concentrated your focus wonderfully. He asked questions that were insightful and sharp, and if you didn't know the answer, the consequences could be worse than simply having your suggestion dismissed. The boss tended to judge how worthy someone was of their spot and had no issue giving territories to others with better plans. Fortunately, his proposal had been accepted, and the increase in sales in his new territory of 245% had also helped with that. At this point, he had everything there he thought he would need, even the increased food requirements that had been reported for shifters, as well as a system to disperse knockout gas. In many ways, that had been the hardest part. From the movies, you would have thought knockout gas was something anyone could get. Not so. But he had cracked that problem. Apparently, dentists who bought illegal street crap were willing to barter for their drugs. Useful life lesson. Another week, and he'd be ready. But he still hadn't overcome the biggest challenge.
How the hell do I get a bunch of kids and someone to train them?
His voice sounded overly loud in the quiet room. He hated working with music or anything. Besides, silence allowed him to be aware of the world around him. Kidnapping kids, one by one, really wouldn't work, and they needed someone to deal with them, who either wouldn't get attached or who was expendable, someone they would listen to, either because they feared, respected, or loved that person. But he needed a way to control that person, too. The conundrum sat in his mind as he worked on the profit and loss sheets for his week. Reports were due the first Sunday of the month, and he learned the hard way that if he waited until the end of the month, it took him forever to get everything updated. Weekly only took an hour or so. The whoop-whoop ringtone of his phone made him look up. His friendly cop calling. SeaTac took a minute to think if he had anyone he could offer up, but right now things were tight and controlled. Maybe some extra good drugs would work.
Yes?
He never answered with his name, simply a question. Much safer that way. I need some weed, some good stuff, and a few lines. If I don't blow some stress, I'm going to kill someone. Namely, a stuck-up-too-good-for-me bitch of a cat. The stream of words surprised SeaTac. Bacon had never been so verbal before. He must really be upset.
Bitch of a cat?
That cop, Largo. They hand her everything just because she has tits and an ass and turns into a pussy. Like she has any idea what it means to be a cop. The snarl in the voice made SeaTac blink. He had to be talking about the chick that was on the videos lately.
Didn't she just get shot?
He thought he'd seen something about that. But honestly, he didn't pay much attention to the news story besides just a random thought. He had too much other stuff to do. The snort of derision on the other end tested his self-control to not start laughing. The last time he'd met anyone this pissed off, it had been his mother, when the woman who had slept with her then-husband had showed up at church wearing the same dress as his mama. Likely story. She showed up the next day fit as a fiddle and they held a damn test for her. She was probably holed up somewhere fucking that troll Davidson. I swear, women swing their tits and people fall over themselves and make life easy for them. He trailed off, and SeaTac could just imagine him stewing. SeaTac figured he needed to distract before the guy had a stroke and removed an excellent asset.
So I've got some extra weed. Primo stuff, would you like it?
Hell yes. And some coke, too. I need something to prevent me from removing this stupid bitch from my space. Would you believe they gave her this cushy PR job working with all the shifter kids? Getting them on buses and driving them around to show them they're just fine. Should have been mine. I've got the seniority. Do you know how much ass I could have gotten with all those mamas looking up at me to protect their babies? An inarticulate scream on the other end made SeaTac wonder how much Bacon had been hitting the bottle already today, or what other modifiers he'd indulged in. But what was more interesting was the idea of shifter kids on a bus.
So what? She just drives around in a bus and only shifter kids get on? Like the short bus for furries?
Ha! That's a good one. Too bad we can't excise this crap from our systems. Who needs to be an animal? Why isn't human good enough? SeaTac didn't answer the rhetorical questions. Just let the man ramble. But not that lucky whore, nah. Each day is a different district, taking the kids and talking about the animal special field trip and all that crap. They even got it up on the website like it's something to be proud of. Fuck that! Tired of thinking of this shit. Meet at our usual place in an hour, and this crap better be good and plentiful, or the only way you'll be leaving is in handcuffs. A click, and the call dropped. SeaTac leaned back looking at the phone. His eyes narrowed. The attitude by Bacon didn't faze him. It made the man easy to control. But the information might be the answer to his problems. He pulled $100 out of his wallet and purchased the coke, noting it down. For this, he'd spend his own money. A certain amount of extra drugs were expected to go missing, but he didn't use, and shorting the boss was just stupid. He pulled up the website on the computer and smiled as he saw all the information he would need. This might just work out after all. With a pep to his step, he went out to reward his cop. The drugs were nothing in the scheme of things. This plan would make him a fortune. Chapter 29. Summer Day. Funding is flowing into genetic research. Well, scientists are still trying to figure out exactly what has allowed some people to shift. Even more people are interested in figuring out if there is a genetic component as to why these people develop this ability. The theories being flooded around are everything from a virus, genetic mutations, research from another government that got away from them, to even the laughable alien species attacking us. Whispers say the person who identifies the trigger will be a shoo-in for the next Nobel Prize. But just as interesting will be figuring out why not everyone was affected. TNN Science. The rest of the week disappeared for McKenna. The results from the promotion test would take a week or more to be validated, but either way, she felt content with her life. She'd been released to light duty mostly because she needed PR training, and even with fast healing, she still needed to give herself some time to recover. That gave her time to organize and direct the movers in packing up her apartment, and then moving it over to her new house. The sale price of the house had been more than fair, honestly a bit under market value. But she'd signed a clause to not sell it again for at least a decade, which made Jeremiah happy. Olivette had packed him up and had him out of there by Thursday, letting her move in. Though, after the movers, down payment, and a cleaning service, she winced as she saw her formerly very healthy bank balance take a hit. But between dealing with the new training for this PR position, dealing with the IA people and more reporters, and then moving in Friday night, she felt like she hadn't had time to breathe in forever. Sunday, she figured she'd invite over Tony, her kids, and JD. In a last-minute idea, she invited Kayla. Everyone accepted with enthusiasm. So Sunday afternoon, she prepared to use her new grill and show off her house. Or at least, it would be her house soon enough. JD arrived an hour early, which fit perfectly with her plans. He loved to grill, and she had no issue letting him do the work. Even better, he showed up with 20 pounds of hamburger patties and buns. She let him play with the grill as she did a store run to make sure they had everything to go with the hamburgers. She drove in, with Tony pulling up as she tried to get groceries out of the car. "Want some help with that?" Tony asked as she opened her car door, letting two children scramble free as if they'd been trapped for hours. Sure. Just needed to make sure we had enough to eat." Tony glanced at the food, arching an eyebrow. "We planning on shifting?" "Planning, no, but I've learned it's better to be prepared. I have a large fridge and a chest freezer if we don't eat it all." Jessie and Jamie stood near her car, looking up at her with serious eyes. McKenna cast a dubious glance at them. "Yes?"
"Can we help?"
Jessie asked, her face somber.
"We're sorry you got hurt."
"Oh, thanks, no, but I'm good. But if you go around the back, JD is back there and should be about ready to start cooking the hamburgers."
"Okay,"
they chorused, then were gone in a flash of dark tan legs. McKenna paused in her movements, arms full of bags. Is it just me, or have they grown a lot since I saw them at Sam's? They've grown a lot. Tony's voice was so dry, McKenna wanted water just hearing it. Tony reached in and grabbed some of the other bags. They're at the height and weight they should be at 10, not 6. I think they've spent so much time as cats they've aged faster. That idea rocked McKenna back. "You think they're aging faster?" Tony shrugged as they walked into the house. "I don't know, but they are sure growing faster. Part of me wants to complain, but they're so healthy. Even their little scrapes and bruises disappear, and they're so happy with this. The teasing of the other kids doesn't bug them." McKenna saw her cast an odd look her way. "What? I haven't done anything to encourage them. Heck, I barely know them," she protested at the look, feeling guilty for some reason. Tony snorted. "That wasn't why I gave you the look. I heard you'll be at their school Wednesday for one of the first shifter experience stops." "Ah, is that their school? Will you be there?" McKenna asked as she pushed her way into the kitchen, dumping bags on the counter and starting to sort. Another load of groceries remained in the car. "Yep, taking the day off. Will be a zombie while I'm there, but that's been a fact of life for years." Tony glanced around. "Let me go get the last set." McKenna nodded, sorting and putting what needed to be cold in the fridge. "I've got the last of the groceries, and look what I picked up in your driveway," Tony said from the door. McKenna looked up to see Tony walking in, arms laden with bags, followed by Kayla, a large container in her hands. "You made it," McKenna said, a smile across her face as she looked at the other woman. Kayla released a shaky sigh, and the tightness drained from her shoulders. "Thanks for inviting me," she turned, looking. "This is your new place?" "Yeah, though I haven't done anything with it. I had the movers put in the bed and the TV. Everything else is still in boxes. Heck, I haven't even unpacked my suitcases yet." She waved at the house. "Feel free to wander. It isn't like I have anything put up anywhere. I kept a lot of the furniture from the previous owner. It fits here and is tougher than what I own. Did you need me to take that?" She nodded at the container in Kayla's arms. Oh, yeah," Kayla offered up the container. "I wanted to bring something to share, so I made mamoul cookies." McKenna peered into the container and saw lots of small, pale cookies. "What are those?" "They're shortbread cookies filled with dates and figs." She looked away, shrugging a bit. "I like them." "Oh, they sound good. Though, to be honest, food lately just sounds good." McKenna flashed her a smile. "JD is out back with Tony's kids. Go." "Okay, if you're sure you don't need me?" She looked torn between escaping and hiding. "Positive. JD is tending the grill, and I'm sure the kids are either driving him crazy or having a blast." Kayla ducked her head and headed through the house, looking around as she moved. Tony waited until the other woman had headed outside before she asked in a quiet voice, "Shifter?" "Yep. Jackal, I think she said. She seemed kinda isolated, so didn't figure it would hurt to ask. And she's a police officer, so I think you and the kids are pretty safe." McKenna winked. "If 3 shifter cops can't handle it, you know you're in big trouble." Tony snorted in laughter. Against bad guys, maybe. Against the terrible duo out there? Trust me, we're outnumbered. McKenna shot her a look, and a curl of worry pooled in her stomach as Tony laughed more. And I'm going to deal with kids? If just 2 are that bad, how are we going to handle a bus full of them? Between the 2 of them, the fridge filled up with groceries. Materials to make a Dagwood-worthy burger were piled on plates. Then they headed out to where JD should be cooking hamburgers on the grill. The deck had been one of her favorite parts of the house, and her new grill sat on it in a place of honor. The grill sat cold, and the back deck was empty. McKenna looked around, confused, when a soft chuff caught her ear. With a mock sigh, she set the plate down on the large table, draping a cloth over it to keep off the flies. Come on, I know where they are. Her voice wry as she waved to Tony, and they walked down the steps of the deck to the corner of the house. As she expected, a brown bear with 2 black jaguar cubs romping on the bear and a fascinated Kayla watching with her hands over her mouth, but her eyes sparkled. This doesn't look like cooking dinner, her voice rang out over the area, and the animals and Kayla turned to look at her. The bear ducked his head, avoiding her eyes. If anything, this looks like making sure you eat me out of every bit of food I bought. She tried to keep a stern look on her face, but it didn't work. Tony, giggling behind her, didn't help any. McKenna threw up her hands in mock exasperation. Well, go on, you 2, she said, waving her hands at Tony and Kayla. Go change. Empty bedrooms and bathrooms are there to be used. Let's have some fun. Kayla darted to look at her. Really? We can do that? McKenna turned and indicated the rolling hills, and the only house is a good mile or more away. Kind of why I wanted the place. Need a nice fence to surround at least the first acre or so. Will give me the privacy to change as I desire. So go. Are you going to change? Tony asked, and McKenna shook her head. I've changed so much lately. I'd rather watch you guys play and get the burgers going. Both women chewed their lips, darting looks at the kids, then back at McKenna. She waved her hands at them in a shooing motion. Go. I'm getting myself a drink, something alcoholic. Going to get the grill going and enjoy this. That last comment pushed them over the edge, and they took off towards the house. 5 minutes later, a gorgeous jaguar crouched at the corner of the house, tail twitching softly as it tracked the antics of the bear. McKenna had pulled a hard cider out of the cooler on the deck, moved a chair so she could see everything while the grill heated up. A smile curved the corner of her lips as she watched the jaguar get ready to pounce. With an elegant leap, one that made McKenna wonder if she looked like that when she jumped, the black creature soared, hitting the bear on the side and knocking it over as she landed with poetic grace and licked a paw. The expressions on the 2 cubs' faces made her ache for a camera to capture all this, but she didn't move. Some things didn't need to be shared with anyone else. A high-pitched yip came from the deck, and McKenna looked over to see a dog-like creature standing there. Long legs and ears that rivaled a jackrabbit, but larger than any dog she'd ever seen. Kayla? She felt stupid asking, but she'd never seen a jackal in person, and only a few on the occasional Animal Planet show. The animal dipped its head, then with a quick tail wag trotted over, almost diffidently to the others, as if asking for permission to join. The shyness evaporated when one of the cubs pounced her. In their cat form, McKenna couldn't separate them at all, and didn't try. But she did grin as the cub and jackal tumbled over and over. The cat, less than half the size of Kayla's form, but the wrestling match looked pretty well matched. And it was wrestling. No one had claws out, and snaps of teeth were pulled, and laughing in animal form echoed off the walls of the house. With a pull of her cider, she got up and started tossing hamburgers on the grill. I hope we have enough, she muttered. But mostly, she watched her friends play, and marveled at the world she existed in as she cooked. When the plate was full of burgers, she went in and grabbed other stuff, potato salad, chips, veggies, and fruit. Loading the table took only a moment, then she walked over to the play, well, what remained of it. At this point, only the cubs were still bouncing, and even they looked tired. The heat of the California summer beat down, and the cat and bear each lay in the shade, while the jackal, who didn't seem distressed by the heat, chased the cubs, nipping at tails with a high yip. Food's ready. Well, why doesn't everyone come change and get some cold drinks and food? All the animals turned towards her, and in a moment, there were 5 animals trying to get into the house to change. McKenna laughed, grabbing the set of shorts and tees that the kids must have shed, and JD's shirt, sandals, and kilt. She walked in, dropping the stuff in each room for the person and closing the door. Still laughing, she headed out and began to build her own masterpiece of a burger. In short order, everyone had gathered around the table and began to inhale food. This time, her hunger wasn't of the same level, so she could watch and see what others saw when you ate after shifting. Chapter 30. Taken. Tragic news over the weekend about the deaths of too many children. In 4 separate incidents, 6 children lost their lives this weekend, and the only thing they had in common was they were all shifters. 2 teens killed themselves in a suicide pact after relentless bullying at school when it was revealed they could shift. They stole guns from friends and shot themselves. Their bodies, discovered by one set of parents when they heard the gunshots. 2 children were killed by religious parents in Utah when their children shifted in front of them. They were beaten to death by their own parents, declaring that they were abominations to God. Another was shot by a scared homeowner when they saw the wolf prowling through their yard. The final might be the most tragic. A young girl shifted and darted out into traffic to be hit by a passing car that never stopped, thinking it had just hit an animal, not a child. This change is affecting all of us, even those who don't shift. All we can do is hope, in the wake of such tragedy, people take a closer look at their actions and remember, what you see might not be everything. TNN op-ed piece. The smile from the weekend remained on McKenna's face, even through 2 days of scheduling, planning, and dry runs. Watching her friends, the word had an interesting taste on her tongue, play and laugh and just exist made for one of the best days in a long time. Year-round schools in the area meant that if this worked, they'd just cycle through kids until things had stabilized a bit more. Even as they went over dry runs for protests, possible riots, or even just a parent getting upset, she focused on the laughter she had shared with friends and wondered why she had avoided it for so long. Years in foster care had taught her to never get attached, and then with working full-time in college, friends had been a secondary situation. And at work, even today being a female cop was hard, and staying remote and untouchable had been the safest way to go. But now? Her grin widened a bit more, even as she filled out the last of the forms. "Hey, Largo?" She looked up as Halleck walked in. "Yes?" "Hernandez took a personal day today, and we really want to do a positive shifter police presence. We're adding Kayla as another person, figuring the extra female will help lower any concerns." McKenna frowned at her, and Halleck shook her head, exasperation clear on her face as she sat down in the chair next to her. "Yes, I am well aware of how sexist it is, and I hate that we're pandering to it. But reality is that women are regarded as more child-oriented and less dangerous, even when they can turn into a giant cat with claws and fangs." Halleck flashed her a quick grin, and McKenna snorted out a short laugh. "Given that, I'd like to have Kayla on there with you. JD can run as your backup. To be honest, we aren't expecting anything. Most of the people raising a fuss are bored housewives with nothing better to do. Besides, she's young and non-threatening. You've hardened up a lot in the last few weeks." McKenna tilted her head, frowning at Halleck. "What are you talking about?" "You don't see it?" "I suppose not. You're all muscle, lean, and you move like a cat now. You've always been a strong woman, but now you radiate health and strength. It's a bit intimidating. Speaking of which, you really do need to spring for new uniforms. Those are baggy on you at this point." Shit, she has a point. All of my clothes are falling off of me. I just haven't wanted to deal. I just keep tightening the belt more and switch to wearing my sports bras. Noted. I think my weight has stabilized, or at least I haven't lost much in the last few days. I was trying to wait and see what happens. Uniforms are not cheap. No, they aren't. But you need new ones. And soon. PR, remember? Got it. McKenna glanced at the paperwork she was finishing up. This was the last of them. Kayla here? I think we're ready to go. Yep. She was changing when I left her. JD is waiting for you and the driver has prepped the bus. McKenna glanced down at the schedule again. Pick up kids at 3 schools for a total of 15 children. along with 2 parents from each school, making for 21 people plus JD, Kayla, the driver, and herself. They were then going to head to the zoo where they had set up a special presentation focusing on animals and how they worked and interacted with others, and talk about the kids and their animals. They had decided to push the idea that there was nothing wrong with being able to shift, and also that it didn't make you better than anyone. Trying to walk the fine line between you're okay and you're better than others would be a pain. Part of her worried they were overreacting, but with the news being what it was, everyone was worried about young kids at risk. All we can do is try, and we're doing that. She rose, grabbing the odd gun because they were going to be around kids all day. It had been decided to forego their normal service weapons, and they would only carry tasers. It was a low-risk assignment, and to make them seem more approachable, even the bulletproof vests had been left behind. Not wearing one left her feeling too light, off balance almost, but it made sense. Besides, a day working with kids would be exhausting. Adding the heavy vest would have added to it and made her less flexible. Gathering up the rest of the stuff, she headed out to the bus where JD and Kayla were already waiting for them. JD hadn't managed to convince anyone to let them wear kilts, so they were all in normal patrol uniforms. The bus, however, was a sight to see. How in the world did I find myself in an episode of the Magic School Bus? It had been painted green, with animals prowling around the base of it, images of all the shifter types that had been identified so far, and the idea was the kids would find themselves in the animals. The zoo trip was so they could see the animals they could be and learn, though McKenna had kept silent about the strange symbols she kept seeing. No one else had mentioned it, and she didn't need to lose her job because of concerns about her sanity. With a quick shake of her head, she shut that fear down, refusing to even acknowledge it, instead walking up and giving everyone a smile. "We ready to do this?" "Yup," JD replied with a half nod. He had his coffee in his hand, even if it was almost 9 a.m. "Kayla, glad you can come with us." She flashed McKenna a smile, more at ease since the weekend. "Thanks. Roel got sick, I guess, so this should be fun. Different, at least." With one last glance around, they climbed into the bus where a taciturn old man by the name of Alfred nodded at them and started it up, and they headed to the first school. The first 2 schools were quick, picking up a total of 10 kids and 4 parents. The first one was a middle school, then 2 elementary schools. For now, they had decided to think of something different with a high school, but no one could agree to anything else. But McKenna was looking forward to their next stop, where Tony and the kids would be getting on. Kayla was in back with the older kids, and the chatter going on back there sounded fun and lively. JD stayed mostly with the driver, though his very presence encouraged good behavior. As the bus pulled up to the last school, she scanned the small group and picked out Tony and her 2 kids almost immediately. Jessie was all but bouncing in place, her hair pulled back into a ponytail, and Jamie scuffing his feet trying to look bored, even as he darted looks at the other kids. One of them, a slightly older kid, stood a bit apart, white blonde hair and clothes that looked worn hard and not well cared for. They pulled up, and McKenna stepped out to welcome everyone, her practiced speech flowing easily at this point. The forms were turned in, liability and that sort of stuff. Then the last set of kids and parents climbed in, and they set off towards the zoo. Tony dropped into the seat behind McKenna as the 5 kids that had boarded all streamed into the back, the twins babbling and talking about animals. The other parent, a dad, took a seat near JD, and they fell into talking about something. McKenna didn't focus enough to pay attention, but she thought it might have been sports. "You look exhausted," she told Tony. "Well, it is the middle of the night for me, and these 2 have been bouncing off the walls all morning. I'm surprised their teacher didn't strangle them. I was about to. How about you? How's this working out?" "We'll see. I'm hoping to get back to patrol, but until this dies down and I can quit being in the public eye, it isn't going to happen." "True. This will be fun, though. They've been looking forward to it, like you wouldn't believe." "Good. I have no idea what the zoo has ready for us, but it should be educational and fun." The ride passed with the chatter of kids and adults until they arrived at the zoo. The zoo had gone all out, and one of the zookeepers even changed for them into a wolf. The other zookeeper explaining the different parts of the animal and how they matched up to human body parts. By the end, McKenna was impressed and had learned a lot about her animal, too. They had lost track of time after a late lunch and were running late as they finally left the zoo after 4. The day had been quiet, and there hadn't been more than a few random comments on social media about the outing, and most of those were positive. The kids were mostly glowing, and even the twins had settled down. "Come on, everyone inside," McKenna cajoled, as the bus pulled up in front, the doors swinging open. Kayla led the way with the 6 younger kids, and the parents hung back, still chattering about what they had learned. From the day McKenna had realized only Tony and one other parent shifted. The others were the only person in their family that did. She paused, walking up to the bus, something catching her attention, and she didn't know what. She stood frozen, trying to figure out what was eating at her, but then shook her head and climbed up into the bus. "Okay, everyone is right behind us." She broke off as she took in the scene as the door shut behind her. The 6 kids sat on the benches, eyes wide, faces pale, and a man she didn't know sat in the driver's seat. And another stood behind Kayla, a wide smile on his face and a gun to her head. A third sat on one of the seats to the side, behind Jessie and Jamie. The door closed behind her, and pounding started on it almost immediately, but she didn't pay any attention, all her focus on the men in the bus. "This should work," the smiling one said. "Drug them, get rid of the pretty one, we'll keep the famous one." He said all this with a calm voice as he held a gun at Kayla's head. The one holding the gun to Jessie's face waggled it, and Jessie's wide green eyes locked on McKenna's, fear clear in her face. The cat snarled and wanted to come up, but she held it in check. The risks right now were too great. She shifted her attention to the man who had the gun to Kayla. Her face leached of all color, but her eyes were steady as she looked at McKenna. A needle pierced her skin, and she turned snarling at the driver who had just injected her. She felt something in her body start to respond, but it was sluggish and undirected. Now, don't get all furry on me, or some of these sweet little things might not make it off this bus alive." The cat snarled at the drug flowing through her system, but there was no option she could see to take them all. If she went for one, Jessie died. If she went for the other, Kayla died. If she went for the third, they would kill them both. Stymied, she sat back and fought to ignore the drug, the cat, and her rage, which was quickly fading as the drugs crept up over her. "Good kitty. Nice to know you can be taught. And they say cats aren't trainable." He motioned her over to the seat nearest the driver. Legs weighted with anger and fear, she moved to the seat, stumbling a bit as she turned to sit. He walked Kayla to the door where JD, the parents, and the other kids were all outside. JD was on his radio. Tony, her face locked into a mask of calm, had the other kids well away from the bus and behind concrete flower pots. Her vision started to go gray at the sides, but she fought to stay conscious, waiting for the right moment. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see a man giving the kids shots, as tears ran down their faces and they sobbed. But most were so scared they didn't fight. But the look on Jessie's face scared her to death. Anger and resentment as she stared at the man that had Kayla at the steps. "Here, this should keep you all busy." His voice calm as he pushed Kayla down the steps. She tumbled out of the bus, trying to catch herself, but she couldn't stop the fall. The smiling man raised his gun and fired twice. From her vantage point, McKenna could see the dark bloom of blood spreading across Kayla's back as she slumped and fell forward. The sound of her own scream, the cries of the kids, JD's hoarse bellow that shifted deeper than humanly possible, and the gunning of the bus engine created a cacophony that dragged her down into darkness. Chapter 31. Sitrep. The recent decision of the U.S. Supreme Court granting all shifters the same rights as everyone else was met with mostly approval through the U.S., but there has been serious backlash from other nations. There is a motion in front of the UN right now to declare anyone who can turn into an animal, with no rights or protection. Plus, for the few extinct animals that people have shifted into, there is a demand for them to stay in animal form and breed to replenish the species. Most insiders expect this to fail badly, especially since there are at least 3 UN ambassadors with shifters in their immediate family. Iraq has declared all shifters to be anathema and killed on sight. And in a policy reversal from North Korea, all shifters have now been declared classified and they're required to report to the nearest military installation. For the most part, however, this seems to have become the new topic of choice at the water cooler. Who could, who couldn't? Would you date one? Would you employ one? Would you do X with one? The world, for the most part, seems to be waiting to see if it really matters in the long run. TNN Anchor. A low whimper, a tugging sensation from her scalp and wetness on her shirt, all combined to pull her up from the darkness. McKenna lay quietly for a moment, trying to get her brain to jumpstart, to figure out everything. Images, memories of what had happened flowed back into her mind, and she locked her jaw to keep from making a sound as the image of Kayla and the blood flashed before her eyes. That has happened. You can't change it. Deal with the now. She cracked her eyes open the tiniest bit, trying to see if anyone was around, while listening more carefully than she'd ever bothered before. She could hear soft whimpers, a sob, and rustling. There was no scent of gun oil or powder, but she did smell fresh blood. Opening her eyes fully, she glanced around, taking in the large room, with mats on the floor, bunk beds, and a bunch of scared kids.
Miss Largo?
She turned to the voice and saw Jessie there holding Jamie, who still looked to be unconscious. The other kids were starting to wake up, eyes large and tears on their faces. Hey, I'm here. Let me get up and take a look, okay? Jessie nodded, her lip trembling, but eyes hard as she protected her brother from the other kids. McKenna pushed herself up and stood to inspect the room. A galley kitchen, 2 doors on one wall, and another door on the other wall, sleeping mats, and up in the ceiling, video cameras. Her blood chilled as she calculated the angles of the camera, realizing they could see almost everything in the room. This time, she accepted the knowledge of how to do that and didn't take the time to worry about it. Other things were more important than her sanity. She turned and looked at the kids, running over in her mind who and what they were. They were all elementary school kids. None of the teenagers had gotten on the bus. Jamie and Jessie, both 7 and in 1st grade. Charlie Davis, a 3rd grader in a white wolf, had been the kid she noticed earlier, standing to the side, his clothes worn, his blue eyes open as he watched her and the others. But he didn't move, taking in the situation with a wary expression. His calmness both set off warning bells and told her he might be someone she could lean on, though she fought with the idea of trusting a 9-year-old with this level of responsibility. She kept looking, and her eyes landed on Nam Bara, another 1st grader. The fragile-looking girl turned into a tiger, a tiger cub. She was still unconscious, but McKenna could see her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Paul Harnan, a cougar, 3rd grade, a stocky boy with brown hair and hazel eyes. He shook his head, trying to sit up. The 6th kid was behind her, whimpering a little. She turned to look at him. Jalmer Johan, who turned into a honey badger of all things, sat holding his leg that was bleeding sluggishly. McKenna analyzed it. Painful, but not threatening. It could wait until she finished assessing the situation. None of the backpacks or coats had come with, just the kids and their clothes, and she'd had all of her equipment stripped. They left her in just her uniform. They'd even taken her shoes, though not the kids. Standing up slowly, McKenna moved over and opened one of the doors near the back. It revealed a simple bathroom, toilet, shower stall, and sink. Filing the information in her head, she headed back and tried the other door. Locked. She looked again and realized the door had been nailed shut. Getting in there wouldn't be quiet or easy. That left the last door. She walked over and looked at it. The other 2 had looked like regular doors. This one didn't. About 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall, it had a weight to it, and the wheel in the middle implied it was meant to be sealed. She gave it an experimental tug, but it didn't budge. Leaning up next to it, she smelled at the crack, and got nothing. Airtight. This is so not good. Increased sobs and harsh breathing pulled her attention back to the kids. Going to the bathroom, she got the toilet paper and headed back over to Jalmer, the cold floor soaking through her sock-covered feet. Hey, let me take a look. You're Jalmer, right? The boy looked up and nodded at her, tears streaking his face, but he didn't say anything, just held his leg out for her. She wiped the blood off. It looked like a cut, as if his leg had gotten snagged on something sharp. It's not bad. Look, it already quit bleeding. McKenna finished cleaning it as best as she could with the toilet paper and a bit of water. By the time she was done, Jamie had woken, and he sat close to his sister, watching everything with matching dark eyes. All of them were awake now except for Nam. She moved over to touch the girl gently. Nam? The girl's eyes flew wide open, and she started to hyperventilate.
Nam, I'm here. Remember me?"
The words didn't make any difference as the girl began to thrash. Then she started to change, stripes appearing as her body morphed into that of a large tiger cub.
"Shit, Nam."
McKenna wrapped her arms around the girl, trying to hold the now squirming and snarling tiger cub. The girl, who for all her relatively small size, she couldn't weigh more than 50 pounds, was very strong and agile.
"Nam, calm down. Nam."
McKenna inserted authority into her voice and clamped down hard on the cat, ignoring the deep scratches the terrified girl inflicted.
"I see I selected the correct person for the job. Or should I say animal?"
The voice came from all sides of the room, and McKenna froze, as did the kids, she noticed. Even Nam in her arms stopped struggling as the cub turned, trying to isolate the voice. McKenna focused in on the cameras and the bright green lights that seemed to stare at her little group.
"And what job would that be?"
"Keep them talking. The more they talk, the more you learn about them. Find out everything you can."
To train these guards. I figure intelligent animals with the right levels of training will forget what it means to be human and will be the best guards money can buy. And I will be the one selling them. Young kids are so easily molded into what you need them to be. I have faith you will be very good at it."
"And why would I do that? Why would I help you destroy these kids?"
"Because otherwise I'll shoot them in front of you, just like I shot the other cop."
His calm, matter-of-fact tone sent rivulets of ice down her spine, and the cat hissed in the back of her mind.
"And how am I supposed to do that?"
She kept her voice flat, even as she petted Nam, trying to soothe the terrified girl.
"Oh, I've been reading up on that. Studying, actually. The Third Reich had some excellent ideas on it, as did a number of cults. What Jim Jones did was fascinating. He managed to convince parents to kill their own children because they believed in him so much. Now, I don't think I'm that charismatic. I'm not. But I bet with you being the only friendly face these children have, the only hope they have, they'll do anything you ask of them."
McKenna hadn't thought she could get any more scared, but those words proved her wrong. Because he was right. These kids would do anything she asked. Listen to her, follow her, because they didn't have anyone else.
"So, let's get started. Have them all strip and shift into their animal forms. That's what they will stay in from now on."
There was silence for a moment. Then the voice came back.
"And there is a first aid kit under the kitchen sink. You might want to clean up that blood."
A click from the speakers, and McKenna looked down at the blood dripping down her arms and onto the floor. Rage seethed under her skin, but at this moment there wasn't anything she could do. All the children depended on her, so she had to follow orders. For now. "Everyone, you need to shift into your animal forms for now." Fear and worry flashed across most of the kids' faces, except for Charlie. He worried her. Too calm, too still, too aware. Jesse and Jamie looked at each other, shrugged, stripped, and shifted, revealing two black, lanky cubs that cavorted around. McKenna kept petting Nam, and the cub had curled tight in her arms. Charlie pulled off his shirt, shoes, and socks, then shifted. A white wolf wiggled out of shorts and underwear. He went over and bumped shoulders with the twins, then moved to Nam, putting his head on her flank, just resting it there. "Go ahead, you two. It'll be okay," McKenna gently encouraged the two remaining kids. Paul and Hjalmar both looked at her. "It will help your leg heal, Hjalmar. Go ahead." A bit of uncomfortable shuffling with their clothes, and she looked away to give them the illusion of privacy as she helped Nam out of the tangled mess they had twisted into in her cat form. When she looked up, she had two jaguars, a cougar, a white wolf, and a honey badger, all sitting looking at her. Even in their animal forms, she could see the stress and worry in their expressions. She closed her eyes for a moment, petting Nam, who stayed next to her. A low rumble, not a purr as much as a half growl, half whine. She hadn't researched tigers as much, and other than the fact that they were meat eaters and that Shere Khan had been the bad guy in the Jungle Book, which didn't tell her much at all.
I'm going to need to feed them. They'll need a lot of food. Is there enough here?
She raised her voice and asked the room as she set Nam down. The girl, though tiny, wasn't light after a while.
Yes, I prepared for that, and you will have food delivered weekly. There should be plenty of supplies for all of you.
McKenna couldn't prevent the next words that came out of her mouth. She should have, but she didn't.
Coffee? Officer, I'm not a monster, I assure you. Yes, there is coffee, and I even provided treats for the children, though no sugar for reasons I am sure you can understand. Now, go, investigate. I'm positive you will find everything you need.
The voice remained calm and cool, and McKenna, with reluctance pulling at her soul, stood up to find out exactly what she would be dealing with for the foreseeable future. Moving on automatic, she picked up all the kids' clothes and moved to look at the cupboards, looking for one with space to put the clothing in. With luck, they would need it soon. I have to think we'll need them. McKenna stood at the counter, part of her attention on the sounds of the animals, the kids, behind her, and part of her struggling to get her fear under control. From what she had figured, they could see her back, but not her face or actions, and that gave her a few moments to not have to worry about what might show in her expression. She folded the clothes on automatic, frowning as she came across a small square object in one of the kids' clothes. She wasn't even sure whose jeans she was folding right now. Pulling it out, she looked at it. A rounded square object with a logo on it. Tracks. Holy shit, they missed this. One of the parents had put a GPS tracker on their kid. Thank God for paranoid parents. She wanted to dance for glee, but she looked around and took a deep breath. Earth, dampness, and the temperature all fed into the knowledge they were underground, which, since they hadn't been found already, probably meant they were too deep for the signal to reach. Biting her lip, she carefully tucked the tracker into one of the shoes, then pulled open a cupboard. She blinked to see it stuffed with canned food. McKenna spent the next few minutes investigating the cupboards until she found one mostly empty with only cleaning supplies in it. She carefully put the clothes away there, the shoe with the tracker carefully placed, and then went to investigate the refrigerator. It, too, was full of food, mostly proteins but also some vegetables. She looked at the various animals, trying to remember what they would eat. The cats and the wolf could eat most meats and vegetables, but the honey badger she flat out didn't know, and she couldn't take the risk of poisoning the child by feeding the wrong thing, which meant asking for help. Every instinct in her rebelled, but surviving right now meant being biddable and not resisting. Do you know if there's anything that honey badgers can't eat? She had to assume they were monitoring 24/7. Anything else would be stupid. So every word, expression, and action would be noticed. As she waited, she gathered ingredients to make a simple soup with lots of meat and the vegetables, hoping the bodies would get what they needed and that the calories would be enough. A click from the ceiling and the voice she thought of as a smiling man's voice came over the speakers. They can eat the same thing as the other animals. You'll notice there is no junk food, though I included some fruit as treats or rewards. But for now, I am assuming the jerky will act as food rewards. I do understand they are not animals, but instead, the beginning of a highly trained workforce. Starving them will not achieve my goals. She didn't snarl back, just nodded and kept cooking, turning often to watch the kids. The 4 cats were all curled up together, focused on the small tiger, licking and rubbing against her. The wolf was inspecting every inch of the room, sniffing along each wall, and constantly glancing up to check on the positioning of everyone. The badger sat in the middle, a bit away from the cats, but still close enough if it stretched he would touch them. The dynamics were fascinating, and it raised questions in her mind. Though some of them faded as one of the jaguars, in cat form without looking at their genitals, she couldn't tell which twin it was, trotted over to the badger, flopped in front of it, and nudged the boy with its head. The badger seemed to sag a bit and rub noses before pulling back and rising to go over to the wolf, starting to follow and mimic his actions. With a leisurely stretch, the cat rose and came over to McKenna, rising up on hind legs to peer at the food she had going. While I don't mind having helpers in the kitchen, I refuse to eat fur in my food. For now, since you can't change, she stressed the words, looking hard at the small black jaguar. You get to stay out of the kitchen." The cat looked at her, flicked both ears back for a moment, then dropped back to all fours and walked out of the kitchen area. With everything browned, she threw it all in a pot and set it to simmer. Hopefully, with the extra veggies and some cheese, there would be enough calories to make up for the change. She walked and inspected everything this time, having achieved a calm that might allow her to not lose it. Patience had always been more JD's specialty than hers. The place was shaped like a plus sign. The kitchen in one square, a sleeping area in another, the entrance she couldn't access in the third, and the two doors, one with a bathroom and the locked room, in their fourth. The center area made for a large, empty area. With a deep breath, she headed into what she inferred was the sleeping area. There were mats, blankets, and a sleeping bag. She glanced at the walls and could see the outlines of what looked like bunk beds. It was a basic area with only a vent up in the ceiling, too small for even the badger to get into. With a mental shrug, she walked into the bathroom. A simple square shower and a flushing toilet, which had to mean a septic system. Not that knowing that information gave her any advantage. But it meant fresh water. She ran the water, happy at the heat that came out. There was toilet paper, but no hygiene supplies. Damn it. Thank you so much for making me ask for this. Not. She walked back out into the main room, glancing at the ceiling. There had been a camera in the bathroom also, and she kept trying to console herself with the idea that everyone in the whole damn world had already seen her naked, so the knowledge they would watch her in the bathroom didn't get them anything else of her except a thrill. Whatever. If they were watching her naked, the kids were safe. In the long run, only that mattered. In an odd way, the animal shapes of the kids would protect them. Or at least, she hoped that was the case. Flatter them. Make them like you. Be diplomatic. The thoughts ghosted through her brain. Training? Or something else? She didn't have the energy to track it down and just acted on it instead. You did really well. This place has almost everything. But unless I've missed something, there are a few items you forgot. McKenna kept her voice calm, even conversational, as she lowered herself to the carpet next to the cats. The wolf and badger were still investigating everything.
Oh? And what would that be?
The voice sounded curious, almost amused. She took a deep breath and petted the knot of fur that was a cougar, tiger, and jaguar. The other was pulling blankets into a nest at this point. I will need tampons, super absorbent, and some pads for my menstrual cycle, which should start in the next 3 to 5 days if I stay on pattern. Granted, she only knew that because she had looked when packing to see if she needed to put her supplies in her bag or could put them in storage. Regularity defined her periods, but an app on her phone still made it a hell of a lot easier than trying to remember. There was silence. So long she didn't know she should ask again, but at least Nam had quit shivering and Paul, the cougar, had convinced her to start romping with him while she waited.
I do apologize, officer.
The title made her wary and proud.
You are correct. I had forgotten that necessity. I will have that delivered prior to your cycle starting. Is there anything else I might have forgotten?
The might was stressed, and she knew to take it easy on her demands. Only some ibuprofen. I'm subject to pain that might make the children uncomfortable if I don't have something to tamp it with. Another long silence, the voice which had a tinge of respect.
So noted, officer. You are good at this, but be aware. I've been preparing. Have a good night. And, teach the animals how to use the toilet.
The speaker clicked off, and the only sounds were the patting of paws as all of them came over and curled up around her. Chapter 32. Training starts.
There is still outcry across the state and nation after the brutal killing of shifter police officer Kayla Mansour and the abduction of Officer McKenna Largo of the viral shifter video fame. To add to the stress, 6 children, all under the age of 9, were taken also, and they are all shifters. Outcry has risen from emerging groups championing the rights of shifters and pointing out if shifter children are going to be highly sought-after targets, special protection and thought need to be given to them. Others are calling this a publicity stunt by the highly visible Officer Largo,
The odds of that being true seem unlikely given the death of another officer and parents who are clamoring to have their children back. Local KWAC News. The crackle of a voice over the speakers pulled her from sleep, a deep darkness that had protected her from her own fears. Blinking, she looked up to stare at the ceiling and became aware of the animals curled up around her, refusing to move even as she tried to get her brain to snap into gear.
Wakey, wakey, time to start training.
The smiling man's voice sounded way too cheerful. McKenna fought down the urge to snarl as she pushed the kids away from her gently. After dinner last night, they had all just curled together for comfort, and the silence from above had been a blessing. She murmured to the kids as she stood and headed to the bathroom, shutting the door more for the kids' sakes than anything. She did her business and headed out to make coffee and figure out what to feed animals that were kids for breakfast. Damn it, I need to watch that. I think of them as animals the longer they are in that form. I can't do that. She had to keep thinking of them as kids and hope that staying in animal form didn't have long-term consequences. There was no reassuring whisper from the depths of her mind to try to keep her hopes up. That made her more depressed than anything else. Setting the coffee maker, which had been stored under the sink, to brewing, she pulled out eggs and some chicken breasts and started cooking them. In minutes, she had 6 sets of eyes looking at her with pleading need, and she had to smile. There was no sugar, but a bit of milk, so she doctored her coffee and set about fixing plates of eggs and chicken for all the animals. A small whine grabbed her attention, and she looked to see most of them shifting uncomfortably. And it dawned on her she had no idea how long they'd been here.
Bathroom. Can you guys use it in animal form?
The 4 males looked at each other, then tilted heads as if unsure.
Well, go try.
Better to know now. The boys trotted off to the bathroom, and she ignored the rattling around in there. But eventually there was a flush, and they came back looking calmer. At least, that was how she interpreted their more relaxed body language. A whine came from Jessie. At least, she assumed that was Jessie as the other jaguar had gone with the rest of the boys. You have to try. Call out if you need help. Jessie shook her head and shifted into human.
I'm not using the bathroom as a cat.
I want to go home. Her voice broke on the last part, and she thought the other girl was about to start changing back to human form.
Officer, apparently I didn't make myself clear. They may not assume human form. If they can't listen, I will have them beaten and drugged. If nothing else, I figure I can get a nice price for their pelt.
The voice came out of the ceiling, and everyone in the room froze. McKenna felt her blood drain from her face, and she dropped to her knees holding Jessie in a grip she knew would leave bruises.
Jessie, change back. It'll be okay.
The girl looked shaken, and the rest of the kids were staring at the ceiling with reactions varying from growls to whimpers. Jessie's lip trembled, and McKenna pulled her close.
I know, she whispered, but you have to change back.
2 tears tracked down the girl's face. Then she shifted, and she held a cat in her arms. McKenna released her slowly, and Jessie walked over to Nam. They looked at each other, then set off at a fast trot to the bathroom. More rattling, but an annoyed hiss that she was sure came from Jessie, but then again, a flush. They came out, Jessie with a wet tail and ears laid back, but they were now more interested in her activities at the stove, though all of them seemed subdued, and she had to fight to focus on what she was doing. The image of Jessie's body covered in bruises flashing through her mind. Time passed in a haze of food, coffee, and cleaning up. But when they were all done eating and the dishes put away, the speaker crackled again. The relaxation that had filled her disappeared in weariness.
Now that you're ready, you will begin training today.
Her body locked into stress, but she continued sipping her coffee even as the kids all waited with similar wariness.
You will receive a delivery shortly with all the information you need to train them. Please don't try to prevaricate. I am watching, and I expect them to learn quickly and well. I'm sure I don't need to explain the consequences to you.
Of course not. I'm sure the children will learn quickly. Her voice calm and unruffled, even as the image of her claws sinking into his smiling face flooded her mind. His smirk, while on the bus had carved into her memories. The taste of his hot blood on the back of her tongue became a craving she didn't want to resist.
I'm glad we understand each other.
A creak of metal from the door to the outside echoed through the room, and McKenna whirled to face the door. But she didn't step away from the counter.
See, I knew you were smart,
the approving voice commented from the air. The snarl was harder to restrain this time, but she did, as the door pushed open, revealing a vault-like wheel on the other side. 2 men stood there, both with guns. One held a Tech-9 confidently in his arms, aimed directly at them, his face blank and unmoving. The other held a 9mm that he holstered as he verified their locations, bending to pick up a small bag. He tossed it into the room, then stepped back and pulled the door closed. Even as he did so, she caught him looking at all of them, and the look gave her chills at the bottom of her soul. McKenna watched all of this, using the coffee cup to help hide any reactions from the watchers. The men had both been in the bus, but she didn't know for sure if that was all who was involved in this. At least 3, but she had to assume more. She could possibly block the door from being opened, but it was their only way out, so it really hurt her more than it hurt them. She depended on their goodwill for damn near everything. Setting the cup down, and trying not to growl at her own failure in seeing a way out of this, she moved over to pick up the bag.
You will find a binder in there with all your instructions, as well as the supplies you will need to train them. Use your creativity, as I expect to see progress in quick fashion.
There was a click on the other end as the voice cut off. She felt more alone, as if attention had shifted away from her. But she couldn't trust that. Not ever. You are always being watched. Remember that. Always. Again, she didn't know if the voice was hers or something else. And right now, she didn't care. Her attention focused on the bag. With a mental sigh, wishing for a table, she sank down on the floor and pulled out the contents. A 3-ring binder filled with sheets and a large handful of small packages of stuff. Curious, she looked at the packages, her confusion growing as she identified them. In small, sealed baggies, there was pot, cocaine, crystal meth, gunpowder, gun oil, and C4. Her hope jumped with the C4, but she had no blasting caps, and her knowledge of how to use it was low. She doubted she could do anything with it. Besides, the amount was about the size of a teaspoon. There was too little here for them to want to dose the kids, which she would have fought tooth and nail, so she couldn't figure out the reasoning behind the samples. Setting them aside, she glanced at the kids. They were all curled up watching her, though she noticed their tails lashed back and forth, betraying their agitation. No worries, guys. We're okay so far. She wanted to pull them all into hugs, but she opened the binder instead, needing to know the crazy idea behind all this. Flipping open the binder, she started to read and felt her heart seize. The words on the pages explained everything clearly. And worse, it made sense, and would probably work from what she had already seen in her limited experimentation with her senses. Latching on to anything to delay the inevitable, she spoke.
I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these words. I anticipated that. I have recordings for each of them so you can hear how to say them correctly. Though, with their intelligence levels, I expect they would be able to understand what was asked regardless. Otherwise, that would prove this whole experiment a failure.
His cool, calm voice made her want to scream. She had to figure out some way to get the kids out of here. But for now, playing along seemed to be the only option. Sounds practical. She laid out the items, separated by a foot or so each. Guys, listen to me. I need you to learn each of these smells, scents, whatever. Memorize them. With tilted heads, they gave her a look, but then did as she asked, even as she railed internally at them even learning it. Look at it this way, at least they'll know for the future. She snorted at the thought, but kept reading, then took another deep breath and started doing what she couldn't figure out how to avoid.
Jessie, come over here, please.
She'd be damned if she treated them any other way than as people. They needed to remember they were still people. One of the jaguars pulled away and slinked over to her. tail still lashing back and forth, but her ears were tilted forward.
Okay, Jessie. You're gonna learn some commands in Klingon.
The cat pulled back, sitting up straight, her whiskers out to the sides.
I know, cool, right? Very Star Trek. Neat, huh?
She half bobbed her head, moving closer to McKenna.
Okay, so you're going to learn instructions in Klingon on how to identify the items you scented. First command is going to be seek.
She took a second to focus and tamp down the anger.
Can you play the word, please?
A crackle, then
Nedge
came through the room.
Nedge.
McKenna repeated, looking closely at Jessie.
When you hear that word, you need to start looking for any of the things you smelled in the packages. Can you do that? Was she asking too much of these kids? Could they do that?
Jessie dipped her head and flicked a tail.
Got it? Okay. Next command. Attack. Yehiv
came across the room. McKenna repeated it, the word feeling odd on her tongue.
If you hear that word, you need to use...
She swallowed, pushing the words past her tongue.
You use claws and teeth to attack the person you are directed to attack. Does that make sense?
Jaguar narrowed her eyes, looking at McKenna, then glanced around the area and bobbed her head once.
Last one, McKenna said, her mouth dry as she reviewed the instructions. Stay. Pelos crackled in the room. She repeated the word. If you hear Pelos, you need to sit and wait for further orders.
Jessie hunched her shoulders, ducking her head between them.
Good. I know you'll be very good at this.
The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she wasn't going to put any of the anger on these kids. They had nothing to do with it. She went through each of the steps with each kid, saving Nam for last as she was in English, and it also gave her the most time to get accustomed to dealing with it. Paul's instructions were all in Esperanto, which was close enough to Spanish that she didn't have an issue pronouncing them, while Hjalmar was in German, which she needed help with. Jamie got Spanish, which she could mangle well enough. Then next most difficult ended up being Charlie with Russian, which was almost harder than the Klingon to pronounce correctly. That completed, she looked at the next step in her instructions. She was to take the samples and hide them and get them to go look for them and find them according to the instructions. Watching these kids being treated like animals, being forced to deprive them of everything human, lashed at her, and she had to fight not to lose control, even as she acted perfectly calm. It shredded her heart with every command. I swear to everything that exists when I get out of here, I'm killing this man slowly and enjoying every single scream. Okay, guys, listen up. I need you all to go to that far corner and close your eyes and face the corner. She pointed to where she wanted them to go. I'm going to hide all of these items, and then one at a time, I'm going to give you your commands in your language and tell you what to seek. Any questions? As soon as the question left her lips, she felt like an idiot. How in the hell were they going to ask if they did have a question? After glancing at each other, they all went into the corner and put their noses to the corner, eyes closed. Feeling like her body had quadrupled in weight, she rose and went and hid the various packages all over the area. She didn't do it easy. She did it hard, making it so they weren't gimmies, though she didn't know if she wanted them to succeed or fail. Once everything was hidden, she went back to where they were and closed her eyes, fighting back tears at what she was teaching them. Forcing her voice to stay level, she looked at the list and started going down it. They followed the same pattern each time. Seek in their language, then the item. But the kids were smart and already knew all their words and probably everyone else's. Uskar. Pot. The signal is 2 yips and cover your nose. Jamie perked up, turned around and started sniffing. It took a minute or two, but he stopped at a kitchen cupboard and yipped twice, then covered his nose. She walked over to the cupboard, opened it, and pulled out the pot. Good job, Jamie. He licked her hand, and then headed back to the area they had been at and sat down. She walked back. Suchin, gun oil. The signal is a long whine and point at the location. Hjalmar stood up, put his legs in front of him in a long stretch, then lifted his head, taking a long sniff. He turned his head left and right and then moved in a straight direction, stopping occasionally to reorient. It took a minute, but he found it. Slowly they worked through everyone, calling out seek in each of their languages. McKenna had no idea how she would be required to train them for attack. They spent the day training for seek and stay, getting them to only respond to their commands. She took time to make them lunch, give them bathroom breaks, but she kept them occupied and busy, even as she tried to think about ways she could get out of there, and nothing appeared at all. I can't get them out of here. How do I keep them human when they are being forced to stay as animals? The thought stayed with her all day long, until at the end, they were curled around her, and she pulled them close and fought back the tears and the feeling of helplessness as sleep pulled her down. Chapter 33. Consequences. While the search still goes on for the missing children in Northern California, disturbing news is emerging from China. The issues with North Korea are well known at this point, but China has instituted a new travel ban for anyone who can shift. That in itself is problematic, but what is really causing concern all the way up to the State Department is anyone who comes into the country and is found can shift is being indefinitely detained. There are stories, which have yet to be substantiated, that the families of those detained are unable to reach anyone to talk about getting their loved ones back. The State Department is in talks about having our citizens returned, but China is being unusual about this entire thing, declaring they have detained no people. TNN News Report. The kids had covered her like a living blanket of fur in the night, and she hadn't had the heart to push them away, nor the desire if she was honest. The blare of an alarm over the speakers pulled her from dreams of being smothered by fur. Waking up, she stretched, pushing grumbling kids from her as she headed to the bathroom. Teeth brushed and bladder emptied, she looked at herself in the small mirror. With a sigh, she removed the bra. No reason to torture herself. She hung it up and emerged back out into the main room. Already her clothes were feeling grimy, but right now she just needed to keep the kids calm. "Morning, guys." She made her voice cheerful as she watched the kids. They didn't deserve her anger, and she refused to punish them because of her inability to figure out a way out. Paul sprang forward, rubbing against her leg, followed by one of the jaguars. The others all curled up tighter in balls, not wanting to move. I so wish I could do that and ignore this reality. "How do eggs, sausage, and biscuits sound?" she asked, after digging through the fridge and pulling out the ingredients. That got a little more interest, and Charlie moved over, sitting back and watching, his whole body still. Hjalmar didn't move except to have his badger form curl tighter into a ball. She didn't push it. They would be moving soon enough. As she cooked, she watched them move around, trips to the bathroom, stretching and interacting. Charlie definitely seemed to be the leader. He nudged Nam and Hjalmar into moving and watched the most. She just cataloged everything as she looked around their prison again, trying to see if there was anything she had missed yesterday. But nothing had changed. They were still watched, and she couldn't see a way to get out. Trying to break down the door would be seen in a minute, as would disabling the cameras. She had no way to set up loops on the cameras, and nothing else to try but take down multiple armed men without her or kids ending up dead. With a brisk shake of her head, dwelling accomplished nothing, she served the kids on plates on the floor. They had provided dog bowls, but she refused to use them. Making the kids feel less human than what they already did would not help in the long run. Food had the wonderful effect of grabbing all of their attention, and she ate as she watched them. Her appetite had disappeared, but she knew she needed food to be able to have a chance of protecting them. Her goal today, keep them entertained and distracted, and try to come up with a plan. She watched Charlie. He paid the most attention to everything, and she worried he might be the one to do something dangerous. "Okay, guys, laps while I do the dishes. Go, run around the area, 20 times. Go." Keeping her voice light required effort, but she even got a smile on her face, watching them tumble about in laps, the 4 cats chasing tails while Charlie just ran. His focus was absolute as he did the laps, ignoring the cat's attempts to pounce on his tail. Hjalmar trundled after them, his low body moving much slower than everyone else. His head hung low as he moved,
No energy in his movements, unlike the others. McKenna just noted. If their captors didn't comment, she wasn't about to get on them for anything. Great job. We ready to start training today? I've got some ideas to mix it up. No, I don't wanna. I wanna go home. This is stupid. She whirled and looked in horror at Hjalmar standing there, holding a blanket up to cover himself, a pout on his lips. And here I was worried about Charlie. Hjalmar, you need to change back. Her voice hit a strident note as she moved over to him. Charlie right behind her, butting Hjalmar at his knees, making the kid buckle and fall onto the floor. No, I want my mom. Tears started to roll down his face, and the other kids watched, their eyes wide, bodies frozen. I know, Hjalmar, I know, but she can't be here right now, and we have to obey the rules right now. The bitterness of those words coated her mouth with acid, even as she kept talking, begging him. So go ahead and change back and we can come up with something fun to do. She knew she was begging, and a part of her prayed that the threat had been just that, a threat, and not something they would back up. No, I'm not doing it. Hjalmar backed into a corner, pulling the blanket back against him, crying at this point, which set off the other kids, and she could see a few of them wanting to change, soft blurs at their edges. Everyone, just calm down. You need to stay in your animal forms. Dropping to her knees in front of him, she pleaded, I know how scary this is, and I really wish we could go home. But we can't right now, and if we don't listen, bad things might happen, and you don't want that, do you? Hjalmar just shook his head crying, and the tiger and panther pushed past Charlie to curl up next to him. The panther purring like crazy while Nam cuddled with him, the tiger cub cuteness enough to make her want to cry. The creak of the door being unlocked caused her heart and brain to freeze. Turning, with icy slowness, she looked at the door, and a wild thought flashed through her mind. Maybe they found us and this nightmare is over? The door pulled open to see Smiling Man standing there. No smile on his face this time. But what really made every bit of her breakfast threaten to reemerge was the whip dangling from his hand. He held it up, and she knew there wasn't a person in the room who didn't focus on it. With a handle wrapped in leather that plaited around the shaft and kept going for about 6 feet, and lay in a deadly pool of leather on the floor. I had hoped I wouldn't need to do this, but I suppose when you deal with children, they don't understand consequences as well as adults. I'm sure after this object lesson, none of them will forget. He didn't sound mad. If anything, he sounded vaguely disappointed. And that made the nausea worse. With shaking knees, she pushed to her feet and walked towards him, waving the kids behind her. No, it's my fault I didn't explain properly. I should be punished, not him. Her mind raced, trying to figure out how to stop this, but behind him were 2 men with guns. They stayed in the shadows, and she couldn't see them properly to know if they were the same ones as on the bus. Plus, her eyes kept drifting back to that whip, her mouth feeling like she had been eating sand. Interesting. It might be worth it to use you as my lesson. Let them know that misbehaving has consequences for others than just themselves. He tilted his head, looking at her. The button-down Oxford and dark slacks a strange contrast to the gang tattoos peeking out of the rolled-up sleeves. She tried to swallow, but her throat didn't work, making it worse as nothing came to mind. Getting past them without her or the kids ending up shot didn't seem possible. Even if she shifted, she couldn't move fast enough to protect all of them. But letting a child get whipped wasn't an option. Very well. I think this is better anyhow. Every time one of them breaks the rules, I'll punish you. He stepped forward, a cold smile on his face. And if you break the rules, I'll punish them. McKenna had to close her eyes as his words sank in. I can't risk doing anything to piss him off. The kids will not pay for my mistakes. Understood. Trying to make it seem okay, she turned to the kids. Go. Sit down. I'm going to go with these men. A chorus of whines and coughs of distress across. Hjalmar, stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the whip.
Oh no. That would reduce the effectiveness of this message. They need to see the punishment, hear it, smell it. Strip.
The last word hard and direct. Protests rose on her lips. The kids did not need to see her naked, but intuition told her saying anything might make it worse. With numb fingers, she pulled off her clothes, setting them in a pile. She looked up to see Smiling Man run his eyes up and down her body.
If anything, I have to say the video of you underplayed your attractiveness.
He glanced around the area, then nodded towards the kitchen.
There, go grab the counter and hold on. Oh, and... Officer?
He played with the sound of that word.
If you try to fight, I'll put a bullet in your brain, then whip the kids to make sure they understand.
Words wouldn't come. She nodded her head in a jerky movement, and without looking at the kids, walked into the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, her fingers so tight on the edge of the laminate countertop they turned white. You can do this. It's just pain. She'd been hurt before. She could do this.
You ready? I figure 20 lashes should be a good number. Effective enough that the animals will understand the consequences, but I don't think it will kill you.
Breathe. In and out. Concentrate on breathing. Her world narrowed down to listening to the people in that room. The kids snuffling, the men shifting their stances, and the quiet steps as Smiling Man approached with the whip. The crack in the air heralded the first strike, but they were so close together, they blended into a single thing, a crack of pain. A startled yell slipped out of her as her skin split under the blow.
Interesting. I had read that this was an effective deterrent to people committing crimes. I'm starting to see why, though getting it to hit is harder than I thought.
Another crack of pain, and McKenna bit her lip so hard metallic blood flooded her mouth. Crack, crack, crack. The sounds were blending together, and the kids were howling in agony, and she heard words spoken, though it took her a minute to understand them.
If they don't shut up, shoot the noisiest one.
The howls stopped immediately, and all she could hear was her ragged breathing.
I don't think I'm getting the full impact. I wonder if I move over here.
Footsteps, then the crack, sharper, faster this time, and she screamed as it lashed across her back, the tip of the whip curling around to slice at her breast.
Oh, much better. This is wonderful. Gentlemen, please double-check this is being recorded. I think it will be an excellent motivational video.
The idle speculation in his voice let her know they would all die before he let them escape. To be free, she would have to kill him. After that, she could only scream, each lash of the whip tearing skin and muscle, curling around her body, and teaching her pain she never knew could exist. By the end, the only reason she still stood is her knees were locked, and she couldn't figure out how to unlock them so she could collapse.
That was 20. From the amount of blood on the floor, I might have overdone it. I would advise you not to die, officer. The children might not survive long if you do.
Blackness wavered in and out, and it took the door clanging shut for her to realize they were gone. Her mind blanked. Pain, the only thing she could feel. A high-pitched whine made her glance down, and Charlie sat at her feet, ignoring the blood dripping on him. "Char!" he barked, and she looked at him, wondering if she had died. "Char!" again, and a growl of frustration as he put his feet on the counter and licked her face. As his tongue trailed across it, she realized she'd been crying. "Jag!" this time, and her brain pulled out what he tried to tell her. "Oh, yeah." She reached for the cat, but it came slowly, sluggish with pain. But as it flowed forward, her back burned with a new fire, and she collapsed, hitting the ground as a cat. McKenna lay there panting, pain ebbing and spiking, but compared to the pain of moments before, she could think. Her eyes opened to see all of them surrounding her. Jalmer, in his honey badger form, sniffing at her, licking and whining. The cats piled around her, surrounding her body, and their heat helped give her something to focus on as she tried to breathe through the pain.
I need to shift back again to help heal.
The idea seemed too hard to even attempt, and she just lay there trying to muster the energy, the courage to shift again. It took a few minutes, but eventually she reached for herself, and her body shifted and turned. Again, hot golden heat tracing her back and stomach where the whip had cut. But by the time she lay there fully human, it didn't hurt. A low ache, but nothing more than that.
Okay, guys, let me get up and go check myself out in the bathroom. Then I'm going to need food.
She focused on the animals surrounding her and covered in her blood from it dripping on them, and puddles on the floor.
And apparently give you a bath.
Hjalmar whined and shook, and she pulled him to her, ignoring the blood and her own nudity.
Hjalmar, it's okay. You didn't know, and given how fast he was here, plus with a whip of all things, I'd say he expected this to happen. It's not your fault. We just have to follow the rules for a while.
She wanted to reassure them it would be okay, but right now she couldn't believe it, and she really didn't want to lie to them. He rubbed against her, the bristly softness of his fur reminding her of her nude state. With shaking legs, she stood and made it to the bathroom, shutting the door on the whines. She lifted her head and, using the mirror, inspected the damage. Lines of scars crossed her back, a few traces of red lines curling around her belly and the sides of her breasts. The blood coating her body made her look like an extra in a horror movie. Moving cautiously, she started the shower and stepped in, the heated water helping with the tension in her body. With a broken sound, she leaned into the water and let the tears come, crying for her failure.
Be strong. You can't let the kids dwell on this. You're alive. They aren't hurt. Suck it up, Kenna.
Scrubbing at her face with her hands, she focused on getting the blood off her body, then stepped out, wrapping a towel around her. She'd left her clothes in the main room. She opened the door to a pile of focused animals, who all seemed to sigh when she opened the door. Charlie moving over to rub against her.
I'll be okay, but I need food. And then, how about a story?
Her voice didn't shake. Too much. There was a chorus of sound she took as approval. Moving to the kitchen, she started to talk.
Some of you know my partner, JD. He's a big lug, turns into a huge bear. But he has to be the unluckiest man alive when it comes to cooking.
She continued to talk, telling light-hearted stories about JD, letting the memories wash around her and give her something to hold close to her chest.
Where are you guys?
Trigger warning. Please be aware that this chapter contains scenes depicting rape and sexual assault. These sections may be disturbing or triggering for some readers. It is recommended that individuals who may be sensitive to such content approach the material with caution and consider their emotional well-being before proceeding.
Chapter 34. Compartmentalize. The emergence of Shifter is still slowly becoming mainstream. New dating sites are popping up. So far, the most popular seem to be furmatched.com and furlove.com, both of which allow you to set not only age, gender, but species you want to be matched with. There are a few dance clubs popping up that are very shifter-friendly and clothing optional, but make sure you bring your ID. 21 and over only, and it is very strictly enforced. Blogs dedicated to the shifter lifestyles are everywhere. The Star Pack blog is by far the most common, but it is very wolf-centric and actively encourages pack formation. The other blog that seems to be the pulse of the shifter is My Inner Beast. It is much more matter-of-fact with all of this going on and mostly focuses on dealing with the dichotomy of animal and man. TNN commentator. Days blended together, and McKenna had to believe they were keeping to 24-hour days, but that was just an assumption. Wake-up calls signaled mornings and breakfast, and the lights being shut off signaled sleep. She was all too aware of how easy it would be to screw with her time sense, but she didn't have any way to combat the manipulation. They moved through the exercises and could seek and stay on command. On what for her was the 7th day, there was a knock and creak at the door. McKenna had just put the last of the dishes in the sink to soak when the sound filtered through the room. She froze and turned to look at the door.
Her attention didn't waver from the door as it swung open, and the two same men as last time stood there, guns at the ready. She locked onto the one with a .45 Glock in one hand, the other holding the door open. "Come on out here, we need to talk to you," the one with the Tech-9 said, his voice cold. "Kids, go to the sleep area. Curl up and stay there, don't move." They moved at her words, eyes and ears following her even as they were curling up. She moved to the door, her eyes now locked on the guns that never wavered from her as she moved towards them. "What part of come out here didn't you understand? Move it!" The man waving a Tech-9 at her ordered, his voice flat as his haircut. McKenna moved forward, her body taut and ready for anything they might pull on her. "Shut the door," Tech-9 ordered, a leer in his voice. McKenna swallowed, bracing herself. Silence reigned in the small area as the man with the 9mm pulled the door shut. In her mind, she called him Glock, but he didn't seem as dangerous as Tech-9 did. Something about Tech-9 had all her hackles raised, even metaphorically, though the idea of being an animal form around him made her feel much safer. The door clanged shut with a level of finality that vibrated her bones. The silence that fell, the lack of noises, suddenly felt strange, almost empty without hearing the children snuffling in the background. Until the door closed, she hadn't realized the constant presence of them created so much noise. She turned, taking in the space. A landing-like area with stairs leading up away from them. She could see the light at the top, but she figured they were still too deep for the tracker to work even out here. A few boxes sat in one corner, but she couldn't tell anything else about them. The men looked at her, and she stood up straighter, sucking her stomach in, watching them, all too aware of Smiling Man still present and most likely watching them. "So how may I assist you, gentlemen?" Her voice professional and measured. Tech-9 smiled at her. "We have information for you, and an offer." His voice dripped malice, and McKenna swallowed past the lump in her throat, just focusing on not reacting. What would that be? She smiled, though her mind flashed up images of blood dripping off their bodies flashing through her mind. The image fascinated her, and she had to resist to focus on it and smile at the thoughts. "We have a busy schedule, and we're stuck here watching you and the four-legged ones. Waste of time. I don't think you're stupid enough to cause problems because you know the kids would pay the price." Tech sneered at her. "But I started thinking about that. I saw your vid. I think I would enjoy using your body." McKenna lifted her eyes to him, staring hard, even as her stomach clenched in reaction to the look in his eyes. She caught the shifting stance of 9, who glanced at the floor and back at the door, and for a second she thought about turning to him for assistance, but that was squashed ruthlessly. "He won't do a damn thing. Just because he might not do anything doesn't mean he'll help. Just stay the course. You can handle anything." "What did you need to talk to me about?" she asked quietly, keeping her eyes locked on Tech's. "We'll have some more supplies for you tomorrow. But we've got some of what you need now, as well as a new training regime. The boss is happy with you. But as for me," he leaned close and leered, "I'm a bit bored, and you are attractive. I think I'm going to need something to keep myself from getting annoyed in the long hours of watching you on the screen." In all her years of being a cop, she'd dealt with a harassment and sexist behavior. She'd learned to ignore it. This insinuation had no wiggle room, and she didn't bother to try to misunderstand. Instead, McKenna turned it back on him. "I don't have time for games. What do you want?" She never let her eyes drift from Tex. To give him even the slightest hint he intimidated her or made her scared. Simple. "I want access to you. Or, if you aren't interested, I'm sure one of the girls will work. Or are they going at night when we can't see everything as clearly? Are those little perverts getting it on under the cover of darkness?" Interesting. Their visibility's limited in the dark. It's something. McKenna tilted her head. "Your boss know about this?" While she didn't trust Smiling Man as far as she could throw him, figuring out where he stood on this might matter. Maybe.
Tech shrugged. Doesn't matter. He's gone to deal with stuff, and I doubt he'd care anyhow. Our other guy is up there keeping an eye on the kids. Hell, maybe he'll watch this and want some too. Tech leaned closer, and she could smell stale cigarettes and beer on his breath. Her mind filed the information away, still with no idea of if this would ever be useful at all. Knowledge is the only power I have right now. The thought filtered through as she braced herself. Part of her hoping all of this was being recorded, so when they finally got out of here, there was evidence of everything. Evidence she planned to make sure would bury all of them. Having video of her being raped would not even rate on the worst of the things that could happen. Let me make sure I understand this perfectly. Her stomach clenched, but it didn't matter. Letting the kids get hurt wasn't a valid option. If I let you rape me, you'll leave the kids alone. If I refuse, you'll attack them. Tech smiled, showing teeth stained by tobacco and meth usage. If you agree, it's not rape. And I'd much rather fuck something with boobs, but I'm not picky. His breath washed over her, and she had to fight not to gag. So, you gonna let me fuck your pussy, kitty cat? McKenna shrugged, looking at him. But she noticed the other guy was paying very close attention to the stairs up. Part of her almost replied to let him know that wasn't how the law read. If he had intercourse with her using the safety of the kids as leverage, the law considered it rape by coercion. But in the long run, the way she defined it didn't change what would happen. Sure. Here? Letting him inside, and the kids seeing this, she would avoid at all costs. His eyes lit up, and she swallowed, trying to push down the nerves. She could deal with this. She could. You've had sex before. Let him rape you and get it over with. The only thing that matters are the kids. Maybe you'll get a chance to take them both out. Gary, switch weapons with me and then move to her side. If you see her start to fight or shift, put a bullet in her skull, Tech said, his eyes never leaving hers. You sure about this? Gary asked, shifting his body weight back and forth. Pull off your pants and get down on your knees, Tech ordered McKenna as he stepped away. The gun didn't waver as Gary followed Tech's orders. They moved far enough away she could never reach them, and his eyes never left the two of them. Oh, hell yes. I've thought about this pussy since I saw her on the vid. Besides, I've heard cops make the best bitches. McKenna watched them out of the corner of her eyes as Gary took the Tech-9, and the other guy took the Glock, walking back over to her as she finished stepping out of her pants and underwear, setting them over to the side. Making this hurt is stupid. You don't know when you'll press charges. Being in pain will let the kids know something is wrong, and they can't know. She looked around as her mind raced, frantically trying to think of a way out of this. But Gary stood watching them, his face blank, and the gun never moved. Tech put the Glock to the back of her head. I don't care if you enjoy this or not, but struggling will get you killed. And then where will those poor animals be? His voice dropped to a sadistic whisper as she felt him pressed against her. But then either way, I get to have my fun. McKenna focused on Gary and ignored Tech's actions. The man stayed alert and his weapon didn't stray. But if he pulled the trigger, the odds were he'd hit Tech as well as her. She'd risk it if she thought Tech would get killed, but she'd probably end up dead or so badly wounded she couldn't fight either. Not an option. Leaving the kids at these monsters' mercy would never be an option. At least his dick is as small as his IQ. The black humor made her smile. We done? Her voice flat. She refused to let them see that anything they did could affect her. Yeah. Here. This was the stuff you needed. Tech walked over to the boxes and pushed them towards the door. Open the door, step in, and we'll push them in there. She followed instructions, taking the time to note the way the door opened and locked, ignoring the burning between her legs. As she pushed the door open, McKenna made sure her face revealed nothing of what had occurred. The kids were all waiting for her, and she could hear the sigh of relief as she walked back through the door. One of the jaguars made as if to come near her, but she shook her head and the cat froze in mid-motion, then sank back down to the ground. Charlie inhaled, then jerked upright, his ears laying back even as his lips pulled back from his teeth. A low growl she felt more than heard rattling from him. McKenna shook her head at them again, and none of the others moved, though Charlie kept up the low growl. From their indifference, McKenna figured the men didn't hear him.
Swallowing and compartmentalizing everything, she turned, watching Gary push the 3 large boxes in even as Tech kept the gun on her, a leer clear on his face.
"Go get your trash,"
he ordered, and she hesitated a minute, as it would leave the kids as his primary targets.
"It wasn't a request, pussy cat."
He emphasized the pussy, his leer growing. McKenna moved towards the kitchen, grabbing the large bag of trash and walking it back to the entrance. Ideas flashing through her mind as to how she could use this, but by the time she got there, both men had backed up, and there was no way she could get near them.
"Set it down, then go back and close the door. There's more instructions in there for you and the animals."
Bowing to necessity at this point, she pushed the door closed and heard it click. She turned around to 6 bodies almost close enough to touch and 6 sets of eyes staring at her, tails lashing and ears laid back in most of them. "I'm fine. I'm just going to go take a shower and then we'll see what's in the boxes, okay?" She pushed calm and cheer into her voice, but something cracked at the far edge of it, and Jessie started to shift to a human. Charlie pushed against her, whining and licking her hand.
"No, don't. You know the consequences."
The girl halted mid-shift, and her entire body shrank in on itself, then melted back into her cat form. The jaguar sat, lashing her tail until a white wolf pushed her out of the way and stared at McKenna. It wasn't a glare. Not quite. His body language implied something else, but McKenna didn't have the energy to figure it out.
"I'm fine. I just need a shower. Nothing more."
She stalked into the bathroom and shut the door firmly. There weren't any locks, but it didn't matter. The only people she wanted to lock out, she couldn't. With iron control that had got her through the years of foster homes, she stepped out of her clothes and washed her only pair of underwear in the sink, scrubbing the blood and semen off of it with the soap there. She wrung it out to dry, then turned on the shower. Once hot, she stepped in, letting the water wash over her. With shaking hands, she washed between her legs with the soap, enjoying the burning pain of the soap. Once she couldn't feel or smell him on her, she let the tears come. The water cascaded over her face, and they disappeared into the rush of water, invisible. She cried until she couldn't anymore, not letting a sob or scream past her lips, just the tears at what had been taken.
"Think it through. You weren't a virgin. He didn't take that from you. You can't get pregnant. Your forethought has removed that danger. You can get tested for disease as soon as you get the kids out. And if you get the chance, you can kill him and enjoy it."
The thoughts repeated, and she centered on herself. Tech couldn't touch her, and the only thing that mattered right now were the kids. If they had given her a choice of being lashed or the kids, she would have made the same choice.
It was the right choice. But you've wallowed long enough. Time to go reassure the kids.
The water had started to grow cold, and she shut it off, drying off with the towel. She brushed her teeth quickly, glad he hadn't kissed her. Not biting his tongue off might have been more temptation than she could have handled. A quick comb through her hair to get out the worst of the tangles, and she was ready to go back to her job. The only job that mattered. The underwear stayed off. She couldn't stand putting wet clothes back on. Pulling on the undershirt and pants, she pulled open the door to 6 animals in a semicircle staring at her. The smile almost felt real.
"See, told you I was fine. I just needed a shower. Now let's go see what's in the boxes."
Her words calmed most of them. As she moved to the boxes and found hygiene supplies, another change of clothes for her, with 3 pair of underwear, more food for the kids, and a new training packet. The rest of the kids played while she went through things, but Charlie wouldn't leave her side, his body laying next to her as she went over the training. At his urging, she gave in and petted him. The action seemed to relax him as much as it soothed the jagged edges in her soul. Chapter 35. Chance.
In an interesting change in criminal statistics, violent crimes against strangers has dropped by at least 30% across the board in America. Other countries are reporting lower instances of rape and mugging. Domestic abuse has not had a similar drop, and crimes with guns have gone up. Right now, the speculation among law enforcement is that it is similar to the drops in crime rates in places with mandatory gun ownership. As one sheriff in Kansas stated,
You don't tend to mug a small female when you know there's a chance she could turn into a big cat and rip your throat out. But while that is just speculation on my part, I'm happy that rapes have dropped over 75% in my jurisdiction. While we don't know if that is the case everywhere, I don't think anyone is upset to hear about such a drastic drop in stranger crimes. KWAC News Editorial. The new training had more commands for all of them to learn and complicated routines. But what would have been time-consuming for animals, the kids learned quickly. Charlie still remained clingy, but McKenna didn't complain, enjoying his presence. Her biggest issue ended up keeping them busy and interested. Luckily, they tended to need more sleep. But she still chafed at all of it. If there was a way out, she couldn't see it. The next afternoon, Tech came again, Gary watching with no comment. She didn't protest, going along with his demands, occupying herself as he raped her by trying to figure out how she could use this against them. Done, he pulled out and nodded at the boxes.
There's more crap there for you. Grab it, then get in there.
He seemed more rushed than last time, but she noted their attention seemed sloppier, as if they didn't really expect her to do anything. They are becoming complacent. The thought flashed through her, and she almost stumbled. She knew that hadn't been her thought. Forcing down the hysterical fear that bubbled up in her, she grabbed the boxes and moved through the open door.
It's happening. I'm going crazy too. Oh, please don't let me lose it before I get these kids safe back home with their families.
Nothing answered her thought, and she fought back the tears. The kids all looked at her, Charlie all but attached to her, his tail tight against his body. No worries, guys. I just got us more stuff. Let me go to the bathroom and I'll be right back. They didn't look reassured, and she didn't want to know what they had thought about what she did out there. Or worse, if they knew. McKenna didn't bother with the shower, just washing herself as she sat on the toilet, trying not to think about all the things going wrong in her life right now.
Suck it up, Kenna. The kids.
She pulled on the clean, unworn underwear, washed out the other, and walked out to start the training again, pretending with voice and body that nothing bothered her. Her dreams attacked her at night, but she didn't let herself scream or cry, even in sleep. The days fell into a routine of rape, training, sleep, and repeat. Her menstrual cycle didn't come, but the amount of stress she dealt with probably influenced that. To keep her sanity, she latched onto the kids even harder, doing anything to keep them occupied. 2 wound up in the evenings to fall asleep immediately. They curled around her, and she told them stories. Some were TV shows, some books she had read, others old fairy tales, and most of them blended together, stealing one from another. The stress caused more weight to fall off of her, but her biggest fear centered on the kids who were acting more like animals every day. She hated it, but the rape had become routine. Even Tech seemed to be getting bored. Gary sat on the stairs, barely watching them, his gun pointed loosely in their direction, but not casual enough that she thought she had a chance. Okay, Charlie. He's got cocaine. The wolf bounded away from her, but rather than the normal under 45 seconds, he pointed at 3 wrong places before he found it. McKenna chewed on her lip. Since day 1, none of them had made a mistake or taken that long. Oh, please don't let them be regressing into animals. A snort of derision in the back of her mind caused her to flinch. She pushed it away, instead calling out the next one. Jessie, Nishpat. One of the cats, tail lashing, slinked out and went around the room. Both of the cats found things fast, with little patience for the action, wanting more to play. But the cat took 5 full minutes, and finally gave the signal after multiple pauses at other locations. Other locations where she had hidden them before. An idea sparked, and she played with it in her head as she called the kids to her. Let's end early today, guys. How about dinner with jerky as treats, and I'll tell you a longer story. They all looked at her with quizzical expressions, but heads nodded down as she led them to the kitchen. She'd found that they still had a locked-in focus on food. For herself, most of it just tasted like ashes in her mouth, so she only ate what she had to. Once they were busy eating, she walked over and lifted her head up, mostly to identify she was talking to the people watching. Excuse me, sir? She kept her voice quiet and meek, tossing in the honorific to stroke his ego. Outside of Tech and Gary, there hadn't been any conversations over the speakers. Even their wake-up calls were just an alarm over the speakers. The silence stretched long enough to make her wonder if they didn't listen anymore. Then a click, and the smiling man's voice.
Yes, Miss Largo.
McKenna noted that he'd dropped the officer title. She decided to take that as a positive. Maybe it meant they didn't think of her as a threat anymore. The problem existed that it might mean they considered her disposable. Either way, it didn't matter. She could feel time slipping through her fingers. She closed her eyes for a minute, thinking how terrified the parents were. How terrified Tony was. Those thoughts helped steel her spine. I am running into an issue with making the training effective. Put the blame on yourself. Keep the kids safe and out of this discussion. Thoughts jumbled together, and she broke out in a cold sweat trying to ignore the voice.
And what would that be?
Interest? Boredom? She couldn't tell anything from his comment.
The packages you provided have been hidden in so many places, their scent has saturated the area. The scent is no longer distinct enough to find in this area. If you would like to make them stretch their abilities, they need a new environment, one with competing scents and unknown hiding places. I'd like to suggest to you an outside test, controlled, of course, to have the packets hidden so they can search them out.
She kept her voice diffident, trying to make it sound like his idea. McKenna had rolled the words around in her head over and over as she prepared the food. This had to work. She needed one chance to get them out of here.
I see that this might be an issue. I had not considered that scents would saturate an area, though from what I've seen in the tapes I've reviewed, you've done a decent job training them. They don't seem to be chafing much against their orders, but I can see that in an area that small there might be a lack of challenge. I will consider it.
The speaker clicked off, and the voice shut off.
He isn't watching everything real time.
She nodded her head, trying to seem meek and subservient. Anything to help make them think the risk was low. But she couldn't assume this guy would think she was stupid. Assume he'd think this was all a trick? What might he ask? Trying to keep things close to normal, she cleaned and thought of something to keep the kids busy, while she struggled to come up with plans to deal with any contingency. As long as he doesn't hurt the kids. If I shift, I can get out of most bonds, I think. She closed her eyes and forced back tears. The stress of trying to stay cheerful and think of a way out beating at her. It has to work. It has to. The day passed, and she created an I Spy game with the kids to keep them busy, but with foreign words, since one of the things provided had been some dictionaries to try to get them more fluent. That ate up more time than she would have thought. The night passed endlessly, with her having a hard time sleeping, trying to decide if she should even get their hopes up about going outside. In the end, she decided no, and slept restlessly, as she tried to think of another option if this was denied. By morning, she had only come up with one last-ditch effort, but the consequences of failure would be all of their lives, and she didn't know if she could make that choice. The banging at the door as she cleaned up the breakfast dishes took her by surprise. No one had ever come this early.
McKenna,
Smiling Man's voice came through the door.
Keep the animals back.
Come here, guys. She called them to her even as her heart leapt. She had to grab the tracker. Moving, she squatted, putting away a dish as she opened the door, grabbing the tracker from the shoe and putting it in her pocket. If she could just get it outside. She had to have faith that she did it fast enough that no one noticed. She continued with the dishes even as the small object burned in her pocket. Please don't let the battery have died. Please. With shaking hands that she tried to stop, she dried them as she turned to face the men in the doorway. There were 3, not counting Smiling Man and Tech. She didn't see Gary and had no idea if that was good or bad.
If you are ready to pay attention now?
The question held more than a hint of annoyance, and she pulled her head between her shoulders, trying to look small. Sorry, I didn't want the dishes to sit. The place is too small and holds the odors.
Well, I decided to use this as a chance to do a presentation, but I'm sure you expected there will be rules.
He stood up a bit straighter, and she fought to look cowed. She'd never done that look very well. Thank you. I'm sure the kids will follow the rules.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Here they are. My men are hiding the various objects outside right now, all within a 500-yard radius. We will go upstairs, and I will give them the commands. They have 5 minutes to find each object I call out, and there are various of each hidden. If they fail, I shoot them. If they attack anyone, I shoot them. If you create any trouble, I shoot them. And McKenna.
He oozed out the syllables of her name, and she thought she might never be able to stand to hear it again.
If I have to shoot them, I'll shoot you, too.
They'll do good, I promise.
They'd better. Your life is counting on these animals having learned everything correctly.
He backed up.
Not that I don't trust you or anything, but you will stay there until we are up the stairs, and then I will call for you. If anyone rushes up the stairs, I'll assume they are escaping and shoot them.
His calm tone never varied as he turned and ascended the stairs. Tech waited until he was almost at the top, then started to climb them backwards. McKenna knelt, gathering the kids around her, letting her hands drift out and pet each one, her voice so low she could barely hear it.
Do your best, but if you hear me yell run, take off. Don't look back. Don't come for me. Get out of there. Hide. Even if they shoot you, run.
She put every bit of fear and command she could into her voice, and they glanced at her, their heads dipping, except Charlie. But there wasn't any time to try to convince him.
Come up now, slowly.
Standing, feeling hope and fear tearing her stomach and heart apart, she climbed the stairs to the only chance she had. Chapter 36. Roll the dice.
My baby changed in the womb. My baby tried to eat his way out of me, proclaims grief-stricken mother as she views the remains of her once human child. More about this horrifying experience on page 8.
Local tabloid headlines.
The youngest change currently on record has been a few 6-year-olds. There are now reports of children who did not change during the first few days of the calling, only a few weeks ago, that are now changing. All of them are older than 5. While any information about infants changing or very young toddlers is still being sought, the consensus is a minimum age is required. The big game changer about this is it means that there may be more children as time goes on, and new ones that are born that may have this ability, even if they weren't alive during the calling. The long-term effects of what this might mean on our society, on our world, are still up for debate, and the current 2% of people shifting might change. Who knows? People who can't shift might one day be the minority. TNN Talking Head.
Even though where they had been kept was equipped with decent lighting, the brightness of the day outside took her by surprise. McKenna squinted as she stared out onto a cloudless day. The sun hung in the sky, and it already had passed 80 degrees. It looked to be mid-morning, so maybe they had kept to normal days. McKenna counted in her head how many days they had been there. 10 days at least. The number made her nauseous. She knew they would still be looking for them, but at this point they'd be expecting bodies. Every fiber of her being focused on the small device laying in her pocket, innocent, and the manifestation of all her hope. She stood at the entrance of their prison, taking everything in as fast as she could, and she still couldn't take it all in or make plans before Smiling Man spoke.
Over here.
He pointed at a location off to the left of the entrance.
You will stand here, and a gun will be kept on you at all times. The animals will go to the line over there.
He pointed to a rough line dragged through the ground out in front. To her relief, Charlie moved first, moving over to the line, the other kids following him at a quick pace. They all took their places, apparently unconcerned by anything going on. But she could see the tenseness in their bodies and their sharp tail slashes. It both terrified her and made her feel better. McKenna stood where instructed, her bare feet hurting on the ground. Don't think about it. Follow your instincts and trust that JD will never quit looking for you. Tech stood next to her, sunglasses on his face hiding his expression. He held his gun out but not pointed at her, which made her smile internally. At least someone didn't regard her as a threat anymore. At this point, anything she could get, she'd take. Smiling Man glanced at her and dismissed her as he walked over to the kids all at the line. She watched his body language carefully. relieved at the arrogance and unconcern she saw there. Not having them practice attacking on anything might make all of them underestimate just how deadly these kids could be. Closing her eyes, she listened carefully, but all she could hear were the men shifting back and forth, the leaves on the trees rustling, and maybe in the distance water rushing over water. Even the air didn't carry any scent of cars or city. McKenna swallowed a sigh and bowed her head, not having to pretend the dejection this time. No traffic, so who knows how far away the road is or how long it might take them to get there. It's all on me.
I'm sure you heard my instructions. I will make the assumption you can understand them. So rather than wasting my time, let's see how your skills are coming.
He glanced at one of his men, who had his cell phone up in front of him.
Ready to start filming? I want to make sure this is recorded so we can show it to buyers.
Got it all right here. Once you view it and we edit it, we can upload it to your cloud storage.
Good. And if not, I suppose we might be able to charge for a snuff film.
Smiling Man shot her a glance as he said it, a smirk clear on his face. The callous remark sent a shiver through her body that she couldn't completely repress, and Tex sneered at her.
Don't worry, pussycat. I'll keep you around for a while. You're too much fun to give up that easily.
McKenna ducked her head, looking at the ground to prevent him from seeing the snarl that flashed across her face. As soon as her expression was back under control, she looked up to watch the kids, her ears straining for any sound, praying to hear sirens. She would wait as long as she could. Then she'd risk everything, because otherwise, they were lost. The ringleader walked over to the kids and waited, glancing at his wrist until two more men came out from under the trees. They nodded as they approached.
Okay, 7 total. As long as I get Tech and Smiling Man, I think the rest will scatter. I can do this. All hidden but not so far up they couldn't reach them. Good. Go get your weapons and keep your eyes open. I don't want any of them to get the bright idea of running away.
His voice dismissive as he turned to her kids, all of them sitting at that line. McKenna wanted to scream, to throw a fit, but she remained calm, still, waiting.
Nedge, pot.
His voice cracked out, and Jessie launched out, her tail lashing as she ran, but it looked like a lope, not a full-out run. And McKenna hoped the kids were even smarter than she thought they were. In less than a minute, 2 yips rang through the air from some trees.
Go see if the animal found the pot or something else,
Smiling Man ordered. One of the 2 thugs, a gun slung over his shoulder, nodded and trotted off in the direction of the sound. Everyone waited a few minutes, men talking quietly, looking bored at the whole situation. After a few minutes, the man apparently moved slower than Jessie did. He trotted back out of the tree, the cat moving at his heels.
Found it right where I put it,
the man affirmed, holding up a bag filled with green. A slow, cruel smile spread over Smiling Man's face.
Excellent.
McKenna flashed to an image of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons in her mind and shuddered at what it implied.
Throw it in the basket. Let's put my investment to the test. Suchen, cocaine.
Jalmer sprang forward this time, but still an easy lope. But this time, one of the men followed him at a fast trot at a wave from Smiling Man. A minute later, he yelled back,
Found it! I'm very impressed, McKenna. These animals are exceeding my expectations.
McKenna forced a shaky smile and swallowed hard. With luck, these idiots would think she had broken.
Please don't let me have been broken.
The testing kept going, and the sun crawled across the sky. After what she thought was at least an hour, the Smiling Man called a halt.
They found everything I hid, but I want one more test to make sure they can actually think.
He nodded at the 2 men.
Take these and hide them again, but this time, don't make them on the ground or easy to see.
Sure thing. The men grabbed the items, divvying them up, then took off. The kids slumped to the ground, looking exhausted. But she could feel their eyes on her, and she knew damn well they were acting. Her heart started to race as she could feel the precious time running out. She watched the kids, hoping. Charlie lifted his head, and his ears twitched backwards, then perked up. He looked at her, and then stretched out, ears pointed in the direction she thought might be the road.
Now or never, Kenna. Take out as many as you can. If the kids run, they should get away. You have to believe that. I need to go pee. Can I go over in those bushes over there?
She'd scoped them out while she waited, a little ways away, far enough to slow down any reaction to her changing, but not so far they'd get nervous she might try to escape, if luck held. Tech narrowed his eyes at her.
Squat here and go. Not like I ain't seen what you've got down there.
I don't want to make the kids uncomfortable.
They need to still see me as their teacher.
She kept her head down and didn't dare look at the kids, even though she knew damn well they could hear her.
Fine, just don't try nothing. I'd hate to put a bullet in your brain.
She sank her head further between her shoulders. At this rate, I'm going to need massage therapy for a month to get the kinks out of my neck and shoulders from trying to look so meek. It rubbed her the wrong way, but she pulled forth all the memories of the beaten wives and girlfriends she'd seen, and she tried to mimic them. Now, more than ever, they had to just not react to her presence. He walked her over to the bushes, the gun pointed in her direction, but his eyes remained on Smiling Man's location. McKenna crouched low, unbuckling her pants and stepping out of them completely. With an effort of will, she made herself pee, the noise causing him to relax, even as she unbuttoned the shirt and slipped it off. It left her naked, the bra something she hadn't bothered to wear after the third day. Straining her ears, she thought she heard something. Maybe a faint whine of sirens? Or it might have been her mind playing tricks on her. Insanity took many forms, and if she heard thoughts that weren't her own, hearing what she wanted didn't surprise her at all. Now or never, Kenna. As long as they get away, it doesn't matter what happens to you. Taking a deep breath, she reached down and called the cat. It sprang towards her, shifting and flowing, but this time it was different. Something was different. Calm. Trust. This is needed for your vengeance. She didn't have time to panic or anything else as her body flowed into a new configuration. Instead of the cougar form she expected, she stood on her hind legs, seeing clearly. The distance fuzziness of the cat's vision gone. She moved her shoulders, feeling arms, not legs, respond. At quick glance down her body revealed a humanoid form, but one covered with fur. Her tongue flicked, verifying a muzzle and sharp teeth, even as her nose pulled in more information than her human one. Looking at Tech, her eyes landed on his shoulder blades instead of his neck.
I'm shorter. A lot shorter.
She glanced down at her arms and the claws that graced each fingertip. Claws that slid in and out as she contracted her hands. Joy at the shape, so perfect for killing, flooded her, even as she blinked in surprise at this configuration. I don't have time to worry about it now. My window is closing. Deal later. She moved slightly to judge her balance. It remained the same. And that was all she needed to know right now. Tossing everything else aside except the need to kill those that had threatened her kids, McKenna leapt at Tech. Chapter 37. Red in Tooth. Historically, addendums to the U.S. Bill of Rights can take months, if not years, to pass. However, an addendum to the Bill of Rights entered only weeks ago has been voted on and passed. This 11th Amendment reads as follows. All citizens of the United States of America will be considered equal under the law irrespective of their gender, age, race, religion, form, disability, national origin, or ability to shift form. This historic update to the Bill of Rights is being lauded by the rights activists as something they have wanted for a long time. There is a similar resolution up in front of the UN for consideration. Given that a few ambassadors have shifters in their immediate family, it is expected to pass just as swiftly. One interesting caveat is a further addendum that claws and teeth will be treated as if they are knives if used in the commission of a crime. TNN correspondent. What would have been a considerable distance for her in human form disappeared easily as she leapt at him, tail lashing. Part of her cataloged it all in an abstract manner. Tail, bipedal, claws, muzzle. Did I mention tail? All of it fit the stereotypical werewolf format, and the knowledge knocked around in her brain in the 2 seconds it had taken to transform and attack. And it added to her glee and terror. Tech turned around. A look of horror flashed onto his face as she impacted into him, sinking her claws into his chest. With a violent yank, she ripped out his heart. The terror on his face as he died warmed her down to her soul. But as good as the blood felt and smelled, there was something more important. She tilted her head back and screamed, "Run!" Her voice came out weird, low, guttural sound, and since her teeth seemed to be mostly fangs, the N disappeared, making the word sound more like "ruh" than what she wanted. But the flurry of movement from where the kids were assured her they had understood her command. McKenna didn't have time to watch them. Her attention needed to be on the imminent threat. Smiling Man. As fast as her attack and kill of Tech had been, Smiler turned, had seen what happened, and grabbed a gun, raising it in her direction. Charge down and to the left. The words that were clear and crisp weren't hers. And right now, she didn't care. She just obeyed. Leaping forward, she shifted her balance as she jumped, coming down towards his right hip as he fired the gun. The crack of the Tech-9 he had grabbed from the man standing next to him sounded like a whip crack through the clearing. A sharp burn across her right shoulder heralded the crack, but it didn't weigh anything compared to what she felt inside. The seething anger seemed amplified, and nothing would stop her from killing this man who had threatened her kids. Her hands, with razor-sharp claws coming out of the top of her fingers, hit him first, sinking into his waist and groin, unimpeded by his jeans or shirt. He screamed as her claws went in, and the only thing sweeter was the scream he made as she curled her hands and yanked across and down. The skin of his belly split like overripe fruit as she gutted him in one move. She lowered her face closer to his and whispered, her words funny and malformed, but for all that, every word rang with intent. "You think I'd ever let you hurt me, kids? That I wouldn't kill you for laying hand on them?" His eyes wide as she stared into his. Then she sank her fangs into his throat. The blood of righteous prey flowed down her throat, and even knowing it was the blood of another human didn't impact her pleasure at it one bit. There are still more. The words that weren't hers mixed with a scream of fright and a movement towards her, caused her head to jerk up from the throat, and she lashed out with her hand in a backward sweep. Her claws sliced through the throat of the third man, his scream turning into a gurgling protest. With a practiced move, though she'd never practiced it, she snapped his neck, then spun, looking for the others, and to see if she could locate the kids. Her kids. "They aren't yours. You'll have to give them back. Tony wants her children back. They aren't yours." The protest fell flat, and even she couldn't believe the words. They were hers, in a way that not even time would ever change. Even when they went back to their parents, they would be hers. There had been 7. 3 were dead. The others were out there. She spun, tracking movement from the man filming all of this. He'd frozen, the phone held out in front of him, eyes wide as he looked at her, fingers shaking. Easy, liquid movements as she stalked towards him, licking the blood off her muzzle. Terrified eyes locked onto that movement, and he started to whimper. But he didn't move. Body locked in place, with terror, she supposed. He could be useful. The thought flashed through her mind, and she jumped at him with a roar. Primal rage burst out of her throat at a decibel volume that should have torn her vocal cords. The sound echoed off the mountains, and she felt it in her bones. The man's eyes rolled back up in his head, and he fainted, leaving her standing over him, blinking in surprise. Huh. That's different. The report of a weapon pulled her head out of the clouds, and she spun towards the sound. One of the remaining men stood behind a tree, leaning out to shoot at her, then back behind it. Either his aim sucked, or the weapon really sucked. Regardless, none of the shots were coming anywhere near her, though she could see his attention riveted on her. With a sharp, vicious kick, she snapped the knee of the unconscious man and broke his trigger finger. A bit surprised at her own actions, she bit back a mental snarl at herself. What? I don't have handcuffs, and I refuse to leave someone dangerous at my back.
A feeling of smug pride washed over her, and her fur literally rippled in horror.
Go away, I don't have time for this, not now.
Pushing down the panic that rose at the back of her throat, she raced towards the idiot firing at her. Moving faster than she knew was humanly possible. He aimed around the tree, and she came around the opposite side, knocking him down, and with instinctive reactions, she lifted her body up over him and kicked down with extended hind claws, ripping his body open from sternum to groin. His tactical vest, not even slowing down her claws.
Useful, that. 5 down, that leaves 2 out with the kids.
She lifted her head, flemming her lips, and locked onto the jumble of scents that could only be one of the men, too many things together. Without active thoughts, she set out at a ground-eating lope, chasing the scent. Her ears listened. The sirens seemed to be getting closer. Maybe she really did hear them. But for now, it didn't matter. McKenna skidded around a tree and came to a sudden stop at the picture in front of her, her mind locking up as she sorted through options faster than she could come up with them. One of the men, who had been out planting the items, had Nam by the scruff of the neck, a 9mm pressed up under her white fur chin. His hand shook, and she could smell his fear and the drugs he took rolling off him with his sweat. He stared at her, eyes so wide it might have been amusing if he didn't have Nam by the scruff.
One step and I'll pull the trigger, I swear.
The words shook as much as his hands. She froze, her claws sliding in and out of her fingers as she watched him. Her tongue flipped out and licked her lips, and he blanched, stepping backwards a bit, trying to get more space between them. Movement flickered behind him, but she didn't let her attention waver from him, his eyes, his shaking hands.
Your move,
she said, her words mangled. But he knew what she meant, and his eyes darted to either side.
Let me go and I'll let the cat go.
No, she crooned as she tensed, angles and options flying at her. At some point, she knew she'd have a breakdown, and very possibly end up like her mom, with brain matter all over the floor. But for now, all that mattered was the terrified tiger cub in his arms. He looked like he was about to speak, when he screamed instead, his arms flying out as something white and furry sank fangs into his back right leg. Nam turned, claws front and rear lashing out and raking down his chest and arm, and he screamed again, flinging her away from him into a tree as he tried to kick the attacker away. McKenna took the opening, covering the distances in a few fast strides, and she attacked, following the red claw marks from Nam. But she didn't just break the skin. She ripped through muscle and organ, gutting him to his spine in 2 fast, brutal movements. He fell, clutching his shredded internal organs, and she dismissed him from her attention, instead turning to focus on Nam. The tiger cub lay slumped at the base of the tree, and McKenna saw red for a moment, but she pushed it down and moved over to crouch next to Nam. With a hand that dripped blood, she reached out and laid a gentle paw on the little body. Nam whimpered and shook her head, looking up at McKenna, and sighed a small chirp of pleasure as she leaned into McKenna's hand. Relief pushed back the rage, and she became aware of the sirens getting close, and a furry body pushed against her leg with a small chirp.
You didn't listen, Charlie.
Speaking was easier each time, but she petted Charlie.
But did good. Think cavalry here. Can you get others? Still need hunt.
The broken words came out, but she fought to wrap her tongue around them. The need to hunt churned at her, but so did the need to protect the kids.
One left. Where?
She asked, somehow knowing he'd know. Charlie whined and nodded off in a westerly direction. She turned her head in the direction he indicated. Tilting her head, she twitched her ears and caught the furtive movement of feet crunching on grass. None of the kids had shoes or clothes, and at this point, it could only be the last one.
Find others. Stay hide till I call you. Don't know if sirens are friendly or not. I won't whisk you.
Charlie bobbed his head, then nudged Nam, who gave a low, half-whine roar, but followed him as he urged her in a direction thick with manzanita bushes. McKenna nodded in appreciation, then turned to stalk the last man. She needed to be quieter and faster, unsure if it would work.
She didn't know how she turned into this werewolf form in the first place. She reached for the cat again. It came, twisting through her, reshaping and settling down into the familiar form. Stress lessened as she moved forward, hunting the last man in her cougar form, everything slightly brighter and sharper than it had been in the half form. Warrior form. That made her flinch and shy away, causing a rustling she didn't intend. Shush. The mental snarl so loud she thought she might have said it, but this form couldn't speak. At least, she didn't think it could. Something else to worry about someday when she had a white straitjacket around her. With focused intensity, as the sirens were now so loud she didn't worry about them being in her head, she followed the last of her prey. He hid in some bushes, crouched low, looking around in fast, sharp moments that reminded her of a frantic bird. Her muzzle stretched in a smile, an odd feeling. She moved slowly through the underbrush, her body with its tawny coloring blending in with the background. Fighting against the ticking clock, she had to be there when whoever was driving with the sirens showed up, but she couldn't risk letting any of them go. The price for what they had done was death, and she'd be damned if she let them get off on technicalities. It didn't matter if she had a job left when this was done or not. Waiting until he turned fully away from her seemed to take forever, but in reality it took less than a minute. She sprang with a silent snarl, landing on his back and biting down to snap his neck, enjoying the taste of his blood sating her need to kill. She stood for a moment, listening, and then the sudden sharp spike in noise as the sirens entered the clearing had her tearing back to where most of this had gone down, in a dead run. Hackles raised, she raced into the area, looking for the children, heart slowing as she couldn't see, but she could smell them, wanting to make sure she had as much control as possible over the situation until she knew the people here would help. She moved over to the one who she had left unconscious and stood over him, watching the vehicles coming tearing into the little clearing.
Chapter 38. Cavalry arrives.
While scientists are still debating the actual cause of this new ability, current statistics are locked in at 2% of the world's population having this new aspect. The feeling and pulse of those with this ability is slowly moving from fear and anger to excitement and wonder. The common name that seems to be emerging from the blogs, chatting, and general discussion going on is the changed. As one blogger explained it, when I turned into a cheetah, everything changed. My outlook on life, my relationships, and me. So we are the changed. There has been strong resistance to the term were, though those whose forms are wolves are holding on to the term more than any other group. However, shifter or shifters seems to be acceptable as a neutral term. Politicians and various governments are still struggling to figure out how to address this change in the world's status quo. People as a whole are struggling even more, torn between religious beliefs, mythology, and the new reality. For now, the only constant seems to be change. Pun intended. TNN anchor. As she watched, 2 sheriff's cars, 3 police cars, 2 ambulances, and the vehicle that made her heart leap with joy, a black Hummer, all pulled into the area, and people boiled out of the vehicles. Police and sheriffs came out, guns drawn, looking around the area. The EMTs jumped out with bags and stood by their vehicles, waiting, bodies tense. The Hummer doors flew open, and 2 people flew out. Her eyes locked on the figure taller than most of the people around, and twice as broad in a kilt. All the tension went out of her. He stood there for a minute, scanning, and as she stood up, he pumped his arm.
"Everyone stand down, that's McKenna,"
he bellowed, and started forward so fast his kilt snapped and cracked as he moved. "You can't know that!" someone shouted. She didn't know who they were, and didn't care.
"Yes, I can. And if it isn't, it's an insane cougar just standing out there waiting for me. You want to stop me? Shoot me."
His pace never slowed, and she sat back, licking her lips. The taste of blood on them made her look down. Her claws and body seemed to be covered in it, liberally. Oh well, they can't hurt anyone ever again. Just hearing his voice, his scent washing over her, and even though she was miles from home, she felt safe. For the first time in way too long, she felt like it might really be over. She walked towards him, creating a bit of space from the unconscious man. JD dropped to his knees in front of her.
"Kenna, are you okay? Is this your blood?"
He paused and looked around.
Where are the kids?
Others were approaching slowly, and she heard an outcry as someone discovered one of the bodies.
I'm going to need some blankets over here and evidence kits, he called out, even as others were still looking for more victims. Bad guys or the kids.
McKenna didn't care. She glanced around, then looked at the person walking up behind JD. Tony. She wanted to smile, but at this point showing more fangs might not be a good thing, and she couldn't answer questions in this form. Tired, hungry, and scared everything would be taken away just as she grabbed for it, she reached for herself, fighting the urge to stay in the form that could run and fight. With a creak of pain and stabbing hunger, she flowed back into her human self. And she realized, even as she became human, the other forms were her too. A sense of satisfaction rippled across her awareness, but she shoved it away to look at JD, Tony, and an EMT rushing towards her, an emergency blanket in his hands. She took the blanket, looking at it for a moment before remembering her nude state. Focusing became hard as she began to bottom out from the adrenaline and hunger. With shaking hands, she took the blanket and wrapped it around her, even as she glanced back at the only person she had left alive.
Kenna, where are my kids? Please tell me they're okay.
Tears ran down Tony's cheeks, and her voice cracked as she spoke, both hands clasped so tightly together her fingers were white. JD had a weird look on his face as he ran his eyes over her.
Frank, go grab that cooler on my Hummer, please,
he called out, even though his eyes never left hers. Feeling like she fought to move through quicksand, McKenna lifted her head to look at the various officers.
Tell them all bad guys are dead. Don't shoot the animals.
Her voice cracked. Maybe all the roaring had damaged her vocal cords after all. JD reacted instantly, no hesitation. He stood and bellowed, his voice easily heard throughout the area.
We've got animals coming out. No one shoot. Hell, put your damn guns away. No one left to cause us issues.
He glared at people, and most of the police officers holstered their weapons, though the two sheriffs looked resistant.
Now!
His tone caused Tony to flinch, but McKenna just waited, too tired to even react. They were so close. She wouldn't take the chance someone might shoot one of the kids. They looked like they would protest, but a police officer whispered to them and they holstered their weapon, reluctance clear in their movement. JD turned to look at Kenna, kneeling down again, his voice low.
Are they okay?
He didn't even try to hide the fear in his voice, and she liked him better for that.
Kids,
come to me. Rustling and a soft yelp came from the manzanita bushes, and then an explosion of fur, paws, and tails as 6 bodies converged on McKenna. Charlie curled up next to her as Paul, Jalmer, and Nam threw themselves at her legs, covering her in a warm blanket. Not licking, but almost as if their animal natures warred with their human restraint, they cuddled as close as they could, tails lashing. 2 black cats bumped their faces against hers for a long moment, their soft purrs clear in the odd silence. With a chirp, they turned and leapt into their mother's outstretched arms, knocking her over as 2 60-pound cats slammed into her and then transformed into 2 naked 6-year-olds. "Mom!" they cried out in unison as they wrapped arms around her, pulling her tight. Tony wrapped her arms around them, so tight that McKenna didn't think any of them could breathe easily. And she didn't think they cared.
My babies,
Tony whispered as tears streaked her face, and she held the kids as if someone might try to take them from her. More blankets were rushed over to them as the EMT started checking out the kids. McKenna looked at the fur blanket surrounding her and smiled.
You can shift now, guys. It's safe. No one will hurt you.
The animals looked at her, then at the people surrounding them. As usual, Charlie made the first move. He pulled away from her and shifted, standing into a strong young boy who looked to her to be older than he had when this started. But her sanity was questionable, so she was probably wrong. The others followed, Nam staying shyly next to her until a female EMT wrapped a blanket around her. And then the questions started flying. Tony remained kneeling, holding on to Jesse and Jamie, but others started trying to get the kids away, and the kids started to fight.
No, Charlie insisted. We stay with McKenna. She protected us.
He pulled away from the EMT and latched onto McKenna, and the other kids started to struggle in earnest.
We need to examine them, make sure they're okay, and examine you, an EMT protested.
McKenna fought to stay conscious at this point.
They aren't hurt past a scrape or two within the last few minutes. I made sure of it.
A sheriff's deputy spoke up.
Please. You can't mean you've been with them nonstop since you went missing.
His voice held derision and contempt, and Charlie snarled at him. Even as McKenna tried to find the words and the energy to respond, Charlie did instead. Yes, she can. They raped her and she never said a word or let us see the tears. McKenna flinched at his words, but she didn't look away from JD's gaze, the only safe place to look. Charlie continued, his hard voice not giving anyone any leeway in what he said. Since they took us, she has been there, fed us, kept us safe, told us stories, and never took out anything on us. His voice cracked. I should know what that looks like, since I've seen my stepdad rape my mom, and then feel her take out her anger on me. Trust me, we're fine. His voice broke as tears started to run down his cheek, and he trembled, even as she wrapped an arm around him. The silver blanket crinkled as she pulled him close, and he leaned his head on her shoulder. She protected us from them. He jerked his chin towards the man lying unconscious near them, but never quit leaning on her. She took our punishments for us. All the kids flinched, and Jalmer let out a high, animal-like whine. She placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing. It's okay. I didn't want you guys to know, she whispered as all the kids leaned against her, touching and glaring at the adults around them. I smelled it. I knew what that smell meant. Then when you came out of the shower, your eyes were red, so I knew, Charlie whispered. But everyone heard. McKenna tried to focus, but her head spun. She couldn't figure out why. She couldn't think straight.
Kenna, here, you're turning gray. How much shifting have you done?
JD pushed something into her hand, the one not wrapped around Charlie. She looked at it blankly, then realized he had put a cooked chicken breast in her hand. Her stomach clenched even as saliva pooled in her mouth, chasing the metallic taste of blood. McKenna shoved it into her mouth and chewed and swallowed as fast as she could. The first few bites and swallows were torture. Not enough food or calories, but every time she finished what she'd held in her hand, JD placed something else in it. Cheese, fish, grilled cheese, cold steak. After about the third thing, she realized the kids were being handed food just about as fast, and her head had cleared considerably. She might be able to think. Clearing her throat, the kids looked at her instantly. You guys need to go with these people. Let them check you out and call your parents. I'm sure they're missing you greatly. Mama, Nan whispered. She swallowed hard and pulled away, but not before she put a gentle kiss on McKenna's cheek. She let an EMT pick her up, wrapped in a silver blanket, and they carried her to the back of one of the ambulances. One by one, Paul and Jalmer were taken off, though they both looked at her as if not sure they wanted to be leaving. Come on, you two. I need the paramedics to look at you also. I need to know that you're okay, Tony said, her voice still rough, and she couldn't stop touching the two kids. And I've got clothes for you and for McKenna. But what about McKenna? Who's going to take care of her? Jessie asked, her green eyes wide as she kept looking back at McKenna.
I am, JD replied, his voice reassuring. Me and all these people here. We're going to take very good care of her.
They will, Jessie, I promise. Do you know how I came to be here today? Tony asked. The two kids looked up at her, shaking their heads. McKenna had wondered that also, but in the scheme of things, she hadn't cared enough to ask. At least, not right now. JD has been incredible. He knew I didn't want to be alone, so I've been crashing at his house. We've talked about getting all of you back. I was there when the call came in that they might have found you. We grabbed the emergency kits we'd prepared and raced here. I know he'll make sure McKenna is just fine. The two kids nodded, then yanked away to a gasp of pain from Tony to enfold McKenna in a quick, hard hug. She hugged them back, and they returned to their mom. Tony looked at McKenna and mouthed something, but she couldn't figure out what she said. With a soft grunt, Tony lifted Jamie into her arms, even as a female officer picked up Jessie. Together, they moved towards the Hummer. As they got there, an EMT peeled away from one of the other kids and came to talk to them.
I'm not leaving. My parents won't be here, Charlie snorted. Lay you money they left as soon as I was taken.
His voice wasn't bitter, but instead almost relieved,
and McKenna pulled him tighter to her. Since he knows, he helped me rescue Nam, I doubt anything I can tell you will surprise him. McKenna sat around a mouthful of food, too hungry to care about social niceties. JD shrugged, but he looked at a deputy. This is your jurisdiction, not mine. The sheriff's deputy, a man looking like he'd spent a lot of time in the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes and mouth. Yeah, though I might be willing to give it up this once. The sheriff is on her way. She'll be here in 10. If you can just wait, I'd rather she lead the questioning. But I must ask, what's up with the scars? Not to get too personal, but I don't remember seeing them on the videos. Charlie growled, an odd sound from a human boy, and she leaned her head against his for a moment. I was an example to the kids to follow the rules. They whipped me. JD bristled up, his body tense. Please tell me you killed him. Her smile was cold, and she saw Charlie's cold smile reflected in the silver blanket. It had the same level of satisfaction. Yes. Too quickly, but he is very dead. No matter the consequences for this day, she'd never regret a single drop of blood she'd shed in killing them. The deputy cleared his throat. And what's the story with that one? His voice more hesitant as his eyes drifted over to the man behind them, with the other deputy standing next to him, and an EMT working on him. Figured you needed someone alive to talk to. Her eyes jerked up, and she paled. Both the sheriff and JD saw that, and their eyes narrowed. What? McKenna? He has a camera. Well, a phone. He was videotaping it. It can't get out. It can't. There should be other videotape. They recorded our every move, even in the bathroom. I suspect the rapes were recorded as well. She ignored JD's flinch at the plural. That can all be evidence, but the video of me killing them? Please, it can't get out. The deputy looked at her for a long moment, then lifted his head to look at the dead bodies, being picked up and arranged as the crime text finished with their pictures. Hey, George, will you come here for a minute? He asked as he turned and strode a few feet away. The other man shrugged, glanced down at the EMT. You good? Yep, dude won't wake for a bit. Have to look at the damage to his knee and fingers. I hit him with a major shot of morphine. From his track marks, he knows exactly how to process it. Cool. Yell if he starts to move. The EMT nodded as the man walked away, over to where the other sheriff's deputy was. JD rose, his movement sure but unhurried, and walked over to the man. There on the ground next to him was a high-end smartphone. With a smooth movement, JD picked it up and slipped it into a pouch on his kilt, then moved back over to McKenna. The relief that washed through her didn't seem wholly hers, but that insanity still had to wait. Thank you. The words slipped out, and she wrapped the blanket closer around her. The sheriff's deputies approached, one going back to watch by the EMT's side. What exactly happened to him? The deputy asked with idle curiosity. I still had to find the kids, and I didn't have handcuffs or anything, and needed to make sure he couldn't get away or shoot me, so... She shrugged, not feeling any guilt. That itself was a bit odd, but simply one more thing to not worry about. The deputy flinched back, but before he could respond, his radio squawked and he walked away to take the call. You okay? You want more food? Did they hurt you with a rape? The fact that he didn't sound any different than when he asked if she wanted coffee let her answer JD, though she did close her eyes rather than see his face. Minor tearing. Obvious signs says I was dry. Last time was yesterday, but I've showered. There might be semen left, but preserving evidence didn't seem to be worth the trauma, as I had no idea when we might be found. Who was it? The edge of a growl coated his words, and she cracked open her eyes to look at him, a slight smile. That one over there. She nodded to where the body of Tech lay. And the one over there masterminded the whole thing. Her head jerked to the corpse of Smiling Man, who had another cop by him, waiting for the text to get finished before they moved him. JD looked at the torn-out throat and ripped open chest of Tech, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. Good. Nice to see sometimes karma works. McKenna choked a bit on a laugh, and Charlie squeezed her. The deputy walked up. The sheriff will be here in a minute. You ready for this? She wanted clothes, and a shower, and some caffeine. But the clothes and shower would ruin evidence, and the odds of her having a job after this was doubtful. But it didn't matter right now. Can I get some coffee?
I've got an iced one in the car. Let me get it. Charlie, you want to come with? I know you know all this, but I bet Kenna might feel better knowing you were taken care of.
McKenna nodded. Go. I told you all about JD. He's my partner and best friend. This is going to be hard enough. Charlie gave her a long look and then a tight hug before he turned to JD. I don't need you to carry me, but I don't have any shoes and walking seems stupid when it's just going to hurt.
Valid point. So how about I give you a ride, but only so you don't hurt your feet and stress out people more than they're already stressed out.
Charlie gave him a solemn nod. JD bent and picked him up, walking backwards towards the Hummer.
I threw in some of my t-shirts just in case. Would you like to wear one? Might be a tad big.
I'd like that. McKenna watched them walk away and then saw another sheriff's car pull into the clearing and braced herself. This would take a while, and she needed to make sure they didn't think she was crazy. It would undermine her story, even if I am turning into a schizo like Mom. You are not suffering from schizophrenia, but now is not the time to explain. Chapter 39. Finders, Keepers.
With news reverberating through most of California and the shockwaves starting to ripple through the rest of the world with the plans for the kidnapped children, businesses are stepping up. The ability to plant GPS trackers in children that would stay through their shifts and enable tracking globally has lost much of the resistance any idea like this faced even a few months ago. The idea of their children being taken and brainwashed to use for other purposes has most parents ready to allow this, and while I understand the fear, I have 2 younger children myself. Where does it end, this ability to track people? What happens when you get older and don't want to be tracked anymore? Can it be put in without approval? The questions begin to stack. But I am glad they found the children and that the only damage that's been reported is to their innocence.
Harvey Klein guessed. McKenna went white and stayed that way through the next 2 hours of questions, showing them the room, transport to the hospital, rape kit,
and finally being allowed to shower in the hospital room.
We still have a lot of questions, but go home, Officer Largo. There isn't anything else at this point that can't wait. The sheriff, an older, no-nonsense woman named Michelle DeSoto, said. You know this is going to blow up for the next few weeks until something else comes up to distract people, but at this point, you know how to keep your mouth shut, and I'm not going to insult you by giving you any of that bullshit. Go home, get drunk, do something. You need to seek counseling, but in my limited opinion, your own house is the best place for you. Thank you. McKenna glanced over to Charlie, who sat on the bed in the hospital room. The rest of the kids? Tony had come by with Jamie and Jessie to say goodnight and promised they would be over to her house the first afternoon she was home. Jessie and Jamie hugged her tight, and then Charlie, before they left. He hadn't said much, just staying with her. When they had to do things to McKenna, like the rape kit, he stayed with JD, but otherwise, he refused to leave her side. Their parents picked them up. Everyone except Mr. Davis here. The address we have on record for his parents is vacant. McKenna watched his shoulder flinch at that, but he didn't look surprised. Child Social Services should be here shortly to take him. The slapped look on Charlie's face didn't even register before the word "no" burst out of McKenna's lips. Sheriff DeSoto looked surprised. Well, he has to go with someone. He can't stay here, and we have no idea where his parents are. He'll stay with me. I have room. I'm afraid that won't be possible, a new voice said as a skinny woman walked into the room. Her hair in a tight bun, her pinched lips, low heels, and professional skirt hit every stereotype McKenna had ever run across, both as a police officer and a kid in the foster system. She's one of those who thinks kids being happy is secondary to everything else. Why not? McKenna asked, even as she saw Charlie curling in on himself, his head scrunched between his shoulders, looking tiny and scared in JD's huge shirt.
Yes, I'd like to hear that too,
JD said, as he walked back into the room, a tray piled with food in his hands. McKenna eyed the food. She'd eaten more in the last few hours than she would have eaten in a week, and finally thought maybe she had approached stable.
Shifting into that half-form, warrior form, seemed to be harder on her than into the cat. Even so, both she and Charlie reached to grab something to nibble on, while the social worker drew up in affront. In order to foster a child, you must pass strict background checks, so we can make sure the child is in a safe environment. He will need to come with me and stay in an emergency residence until we can find a foster family to place him with. Her officious tone was that of someone who used her power to make sure people obeyed, and McKenna had to fight to swallow the food. Come with me, child! Her voice imperious as she glanced at her notebook. No. JD and Charlie glanced at her as she said the word, her voice mild almost. Sheriff DeSoto looked like she didn't know if she wanted to duck and cover or get popcorn and watch the show. Miss Largo, you don't get to tell me how to do my job. The child will be coming with me. In fact, he should have been remanded to our custody hours ago. No. Charlie had by this point crawled up on the bed with her and sat leaning against her back. Not hugging her, but she could feel his body heat. She almost pulled him into a hug, but finished eating what was in her hands as the social worker puffed up, her face and neck mottling red and white. Now, see here. I am going to do my job, and you— Do you know who I am? McKenna asked, even as she had a brief internal war with herself about what she was about to do. It was a short fight, and Charlie's body leaning to hers killed most of her protests before they began. The woman's tirade stuttered to a halt as she looked at McKenna, still in a hospital gown, JD in his kilt, and Sheriff DeSoto in her uniform. The woman looked like she had decided to watch the train wreck and leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, a smile hiding at the corner of her lips. Yes? You're the shifter cop? She stuttered a little as she said it. McKenna smiled, and the woman flinched back. Excellent. Then imagine your supervisor's reaction, the mayor's reaction, the governor's reaction. When I call a press conference and explain to them exactly how a child was removed from my custody to get dumped with strangers, after he had been kidnapped, forced to perform for drug dealers, watch someone get whipped half to death, and then had to attack and watch me kill someone to save a little girl, his friend. The woman had grown paler and paler, the red leaching out of her face. I'm sure there are any number of reporters that would kill to get an exclusive on that story. Especially if I was willing to show them all the scars I got protecting these children. So, I think you need to decide if you're going to leave this child with me, or if you're going to try to force him to leave and watch me destroy you and your department. Because I can guarantee I'll be on the phone with the press before you make it out of the hospital. By the time McKenna was done, the woman made the eggshell white walls look full of color. I see. I believe you have a compelling argument. Why don't I go get the paperwork for you to be declared a temporary guardian until the courts locate his parents? Her words tumbled out faster and faster as she backed out the door, then turned and fled down the hall. JD choked on his laughter, looking at McKenna with sparkling eyes. Way to be a bitch. I'm impressed. Everyone in the room cracked up, and DeSoto pushed herself away from the wall. I have to say I enjoyed that. Francine is a bit too fond of paperwork and rules for my taste. She tilted her head, looking at McKenna. Would you really have done that? Yep, and given Charlie the address to my house. She smiled sardonically. He can turn into a wolf. I don't really think that woman could have kept him 30 seconds after they walked out of this room. She glanced down to smile at Charlie. Did you really think I'd let anyone who didn't want you take you? He shrugged, burying his head into her hair. She'd noticed the kids had slightly more animalistic emotional tells now, but hoped it would fade with time. But either way, she didn't really care. JD, if you'll take Charlie to get the car packed up, I'm going to change, then we can head to my house. You have anything he can sleep on? I've only got one bed at the moment. Not like I'm leaving you two alone. You know damn well the press is probably already there. I've got a camp mat and sleeping bag for me. We'll make up the couch for Charlie. Good. Exhaustion hit her like a giant hand, and she had to fight back the wave of dizziness. Scooch, let me get dressed in private for the first time in way too long. Everyone flashed half-humorous, half-uncomfortable smiles at her and left her alone for a moment. She wondered if she was crazy keeping Charlie, but the idea of letting that waste of a human to take him with no consideration of what he'd already been through made her stomach churn. It hadn't been an option. With a sigh, she forced herself to her feet and started pulling on the clothes JD had left for her. She could hear him and Charlie talking in the hall. Smiling, she dressed. They'd tested her and the dead rapist for STDs, and she still needed to wait for that result. She couldn't get pregnant. She'd made sure of that when she turned 21. So as long as the idiot didn't have HIV or something, she'd probably be okay in the long run. At least, physically. She'd deal with the rape later, when she had time. That only left... Her mind shied away from it as she finished dressing. The bra feeling odd after so long without one, and didn't fit correctly anymore. Another thing to deal with later. Ready to go home, she pulled open the door and stumbled to a halt as a voice whispered through her head. "We do need to discuss this, and relatively soon, Commander." Epilogue.
We must beware! The devil is in our midst. This ability to change is not a gift. It is a reflection of the evil in our souls. Are beasts that care not for the word of God, and spit on his promise to us. I implore you, fight the demon in your body, forsake the way of the animal, and remain true to the promise God made to Christ to allow all his children into heaven. For only the children of God will make their way into heaven, not the animals of the forest. These animal forms are temptation and sin wrapped up in one. If you were weak enough to be so inflicted, I implore you to resist and stay human. Turn your back on the beast within.
Popular TV televangelist. The crisp white linen suit looked off-yellow in the overhead fluorescent light. An older man with a touch of silver at his temples, the only marring of his dark brown hair, leaned back watching the news story playing out on all the channels. No close-ups of the bodies were being displayed due to their gruesome demise, but the names of the identified were displayed, including one Alfonso Jones. He finished watching the special report, then clicked mute on the TV, pulling out a key from his waistcoat. He walked over and unlocked a file cabinet. Pulling open a drawer with tax returns on the little card in the window, he pulled out a ledger. Moving back over to the desk, he flipped it open and scrolled down until he came to a name. SeaTac, Alfonso Jones. With a neat, deliberate movement, he drew a line through that name. Stapling his fingers for a minute, he looked over the numbers, a small moo of distaste crossing his face. Then he picked up his business phone, flipped off all geolocator tags, opened an IP randomizer, then pulled up the VoIP app and dialed a number. It rang once, then a young man's voice answered. "Yes, boss?" "Mr. Jones's experiment has failed, most spectacularly, I might add. Please find someone else to cover his territory and see his people are reassigned or dealt with. I'd like to have you double-check the books before you send them on. It occurs to me he had a bit too much free cash." Immediately, but I would offer SeaTac didn't use, so any extra he always sold." "Oh. Interesting. He had promise. Please get any video he had. Utilize the police contacts as needed. I believe he had at least one cop he sold to." "Of course. Anything else?" The man shot a look up at the TV and frowned. "Yes. Please prepare a dossier on McKenna Largo. I don't know how much he might have let slip, and at this point, I believe she has proved she is a dangerous woman." "Will do." The man hung up, wiped the call from his phone, deleted all the apps, then reinstalled them. As he waited, he put the ledger away. He noted on his calendar to do a full wipe of the phone in a week. Then he turned to the speech he had to give that afternoon. His audience always liked something relevant to the current state of the world. The power of children. Yes, I think that will do perfectly. He began to write in clear, elegant longhand as he worked out his thoughts and the message he wanted to convey. Afterward. I hope you enjoyed Book 1 of the Kaylid Chronicles. The series has a lot more in store for McKenna, JD, Tony, and the kids. Visit my website at www.badashpublishing.com to sign up for my newsletter and find out about the books in the series. If you enjoyed, please leave a review. It makes a huge difference to authors. Kaylid Chronicles, No Choice, Commander, Incoming, Allies, Family are all available now. Kaylid Novellas, New Games, Home Alone, Decisions, Trust, available now. Read my other series if you want something a bit darker and more military. Blood War Rage, Blood War Fight, Blood War Power. Or, if you like urban fantasy, try my Twisted Luck series at other retailers or my own store at www.badashpublishing.com. Enjoy! This has been No Choice, Book 1 in the Kaylid Chronicles. Written by Mel Todd. Narrated by Rebecca Brokaw-Sands.